She is pretending to be a lawyer, my sister told the state disciplinary committee, slapping a forged dossier onto the heavy wooden podium. I had just won a $15 million class action lawsuit the week before, but my parents stood right beside her, nodding vigorously and swearing under oath that I was a fraud who stole a senior partner identity. I sat completely silent at the defense table, taking a slow sip of ice water. The presiding judge opened my sealed file, took off his glasses, and stared at my family with a look of absolute disgust. In 30 years on the bench, he whispered, "I have never seen anything like this. I am Camilla, 33 years old, and until that exact moment, I had kept my incredible success a complete secret from the people who raised me." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to let your toxic family dig their own grave. The mahogany-paneled room of the Illinois State Bar Disciplinary Committee was dead silent, except for the rhythmic clicking of the court reporter keyboard. At 33, I had spent the last 8 years of my life building an ironclad reputation in the cutthroat world of Chicago corporate litigation. Yet here I was, sitting at the respondent table, listening to my own flesh and blood try to put me behind bars. My sister Brittany, who had just turned 30, stood at the podium, radiating the unearned confidence of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. She adjusted her tailored tweed blazer, an expensive gift from her husband Terrence. Terrence sat 2 rows back in the gallery. As a 35-year-old African-American investment banker, he was the picture of financial district success. He wore a custom suit, a heavy gold watch peeking out from his cuff, and usually carried an arrogant lean to his posture. But today, his confident smirk was completely missing. He kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing erratically against the wooden pew. He had no idea what was actually coming for him. Last week, a firm in this city won a massive $15 million settlement, Brittany stated, her voice echoing with practiced indignation. My sister Camilla was parading around the courthouse claiming she was the lead counsel. It is a complete fabrication. She is nothing but a paralegal, a glorified secretary who stole her boss' identity to sign those injunctions. She is committing the unauthorized practice of law, and she is using it to target my husband's investment firm out of sheer petty jealousy. I did not flinch. I kept my face entirely neutral, letting her dig the hole deeper. "If I may, Your Honor, my mother." Sylvia stood up from the gallery, clutching her pearl necklace as if the very air in the room offended her. "We are her family. We know her intellectual limits better than anyone. Camilla could not pass the entrance exams for law school if she tried. She has always been the slow one, the difficult one." My father Howard chimed in, his booming voice carrying the authority he usually reserved for his country club dinners. "We refused to pay for her education 8 years ago because we knew it was a pipe dream. We told her she would make a fool of the family name. Now she is taking her resentment out on Terrence, a brilliant self-made man who actually went to a top-tier school and built a legitimate investment fund. She hacked into her firm computer to file fake subpoenas against his company." There it was, the entire toxic dynamic of my childhood delivered on a silver platter for the disciplinary board. In just 3 minutes, they had painted a vivid picture of my life. I was the scapegoat, the disappointment whose ambitions were mocked and defunded, while Terrence, the golden son-in-law who funded their lavish lifestyle, was the protected asset. They had absolutely no idea that I had taken out a massive student loan, graduated at the top of my class at Northwestern University, and passed the Illinois bar exam with the highest score of my year at age 25. I had kept my professional life entirely partitioned from them because I knew without a shadow of a doubt that their toxicity would poison everything I built. I let them believe I was a struggling assistant living in a cramped apartment. I let them brag about Terrence's wealth at Thanksgiving dinners, while I smiled quietly and ate my turkey. I kept my distance until Terrence's fraudulent investment firm landed on my desk. Miss Camilla Judge Harrison Thorne peered down at me over his reading glasses. He was a man with 30 years of judicial experience and zero tolerance for nonsense. Your family has submitted a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury claiming you are impersonating a licensed attorney to file fraudulent injunctions against Horizon Apex Capital, which is Mr. Terrence's firm. Do you have a response? I calmly pushed my leather chair back and stood up, buttoning my suit jacket with deliberate precision. No verbal response to the personal insults, Your Honor. The facts will suffice. I believe you have my state bar registration number and credentials in the sealed file I handed to the clerk this morning. Brittany let out a theatrical, mocking laugh that echoed through the high ceilings of the chamber. She probably printed a fake identification card off the internet, she scoffed, looking back at our parents for validation. They nodded in agreement, their faces twisted with disdain. You should put her in handcuffs right now before she defrauds anyone else. I looked at my sister, watching her revel in what she thought was my ultimate destruction. She was so blinded by her own arrogance and our parents' constant validation that she could not see the trap she had just willingly walked into. They had signed sworn statements. They had lied to a disciplinary committee to protect a criminal. And they had done it all because they fundamentally believed I was too stupid to outsmart them. My heart beat steadily in my chest, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy radiating from my family side of the room. For years I had swallowed their insults, enduring every backhanded compliment and cruel joke about my supposed lack of potential. They had constructed an entire reality where I was a failure, and Brittany was the crown jewel. But the real world does not operate on family favoritism. The real world operates on evidence, credentials, and the cold hard truth. As the judge slowly pulled the documents from the envelope, I watched my father whisper something smug to my mother. They thought they had won. They thought they were burying me. They did not realize they had just handed me the shovel. I clasped my hands in front of me and waited. The sound of the thick paper tearing echoed loudly in the silent room. This was the exact moment everything would change forever. Judge Thorne did not look at Brittany. He picked up the sealed blue folder the clerk had placed on his high wooden bench. He broke the heavy wax seal with his thumb, opened the thick file, and began to read the very first page. The silence in the room stretched out thick and incredibly suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning unit above us. He turned the first page. Then he turned another. Slowly, with deliberate and terrifying precision, Judge Thorne took off his reading glasses and placed them on the wood in front of him. He looked out at my parents, then shifted his gaze to Brittany, and finally settled his eyes on Terrence, who was practically sweating in the gallery. In 30 years sitting on this bench, Judge Thorne began, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet timbre that commanded absolute obedience. I have never seen a family willingly walk into a disciplinary committee and hand-deliver a sworn confession of perjury with such spectacular stupidity. Brittany's smug smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me?" She stammered, her hands gripping the edges of the podium tightly. "Miss Brittany," the judge barked, causing her to flinch visibly. "The woman sitting behind you is not a paralegal. Camilla is a senior partner at Vanguard Croft and Associates. She holds active spotless law licenses in Illinois, New York, and Delaware. Furthermore, she was in fact the lead counsel on the $15 million settlement she won last Thursday." "That is absolutely impossible, my father," Howard stammered, the healthy color completely draining from his face. He gripped the wooden railing in front of him. "She does not have the money for law school. She works in a tiny cubicle. We know this for a fact. She works in a corner office on the 40th floor of one of the most prestigious buildings in Chicago." "Mr. Howard," Judge Thorne corrected coldly, "and what is far more interesting to this committee is the injunction she filed against Horizon Apex Capital. It was not a petty forged document drawn up out of jealousy. It was a legally binding, federally approved freeze on all assets tied to your son-in-law firm, pending an active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission." At the explicit mention of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Terrence jumped up from his gallery seat, as if he had been physically burned by the wood beneath him. His eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. His expensive custom suit suddenly looked like a prison uniform waiting to happen. "This is a massive mistake. I need to make a phone call right now. Terrence stammered, scrambling past my parents and stumbling into the narrow aisle. He shoved his luxury smartphone into his pocket and practically sprinted toward the heavy oak double doors at the back of the hearing room. Terrence, where are you going? Brittany called out, her voice shrill with sudden and overwhelming confusion. She abandoned the podium and took a step toward the aisle. He did not answer her. He threw his entire body weight against the heavy doors to push them open, but they swung open from the outside before he could even hit the brass handles. Two tall men in dark suits and windbreakers, with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across their chests, stepped into the doorway, completely blocking his exit. Behind them stood three more armed federal agents, their faces stern and unyielding. Terrence Miller, the lead agent, asked, his deep voice echoing through the quiet and stunned room. Terrence froze in his tracks, his hands trembling uncontrollably at his sides. He looked like a trapped animal, realizing the cage had just snapped shut. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities, fraud and money laundering in connection with a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme at Horizon Apex Capital, the agent stated firmly. He swiftly grabbed Terrence by the arm, spinning him around to slap heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The metallic click-clack of the restraints echoed loudly in the stunned silence of the room. Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, lunging forward down the aisle, but a uniformed bailiff immediately stepped in her path, holding up a hand to stop her. What are you doing to my husband? Get your hands off him right now. Mom, Dad, do something. My mother. Sylvia swayed on her feet, clutching her chest as if having a heart attack. There must be a horrible mistake. Terrence is a legitimate investment banker. He manages our entire retirement fund. Every single penny we have is with him. I finally spoke, my voice cutting through the chaotic noise like a sharpened scalpel. He was managing your retirement fund, Sylvia, until he used it to pay off the early investors in his pyramid scheme to keep the federal investigators off his back. My father whirled around to face me, his face turning a dark shade of purple with uncontrollable rage. You set this up. You orchestrated this whole thing to ruin us because you have always been jealous of your sister. I did not orchestrate his insatiable greed. Howard, I replied calmly, gathering my documents and placing them back into my leather briefcase. I just followed the paper trail he was too careless to hide. And as for the sworn affidavit, you three signed this morning, claiming I was a fraud. I looked up at Judge Thorne, who was already signaling the court reporter to mark the exhibit. The committee will be forwarding a copy of your perjured statements directly to the state attorney office, Judge Thorne stated loudly, banging his wooden gavel to restore order. Filing a false complaint to the state bar to obstruct an ongoing federal investigation is a severe felony. You should all retain criminal defense counsel immediately. This hearing is adjourned. As the federal agents dragged a pale, completely silent Terrence out of the disciplinary room, Brittany dropped to her knees in the middle of the aisle, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Her perfect tweed blazer was now wrinkled and disregarded. I walked past them, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The war had not just begun, I had already fired the winning shot. But they were too arrogant to realize the massive financial fallout had not even reached their bank accounts yet. The destruction of their perfect lives was only just beginning, and I was going to watch every second unfold with absolute satisfaction. The heavy oak doors of the hearing room closed behind me with a resounding thud, but they did not block out the chaotic shouting erupting from inside. I stepped into the expansive marble hallway of the state building, gripping the handle of my leather briefcase. The cool air of the corridor felt refreshing against my skin. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp scent of floor wax and old paper, the smell of the legal system doing its job. I had barely taken 10 steps toward the elevator bank when the doors burst open again. Rapid, aggressive footsteps echoed against the polished stone floor, closing the distance between us in seconds. Camilla, turn around right now, my father Howard bellowed, his voice cracking with unfiltered rage. I stopped and turned slowly, maintaining the same composed posture I used when facing hostile opposing counsel. Howard and my mother Sylvia were practically running toward me. Sylvia mascara was running down her cheeks, leaving dark, jagged streaks across her perfectly powdered face. She looked entirely unhinged, a far cry from the poised country club matriarch she desperately pretended to be. "You are a monster!" Sylvia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are a cold, calculated monster. How could you do this to your own family? Terrence is a good man. He is the father of your sister's children. You just sent the federal agents to drag him away like a common criminal." "I did not send them, Sylvia," I corrected her evenly. "The Securities and Exchange Commission sent them. The Federal Bureau of Investigation sent them. Terrence broke federal laws, and he got caught. I simply did my job as a corporate litigator and protected my clients from his massive fraud." My father stepped in front of my mother, his chest heaving as he tried to physically intimidate me. "Do not give me that legal nonsense," he snarled, stepping into my personal space. "This is not about your clients. This is about your petty lifelong jealousy. You have always been insanely jealous of Brittany. You could never stand that she married a successful investment banker while you were a nobody. You orchestrated this entire investigation just to humiliate her and destroy her husband out of spite." I looked at the man who was supposed to be my protector, the man who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was not smart enough, not pretty enough, and not worthy of the family name. The sheer audacity of his accusation did not hurt me anymore. It only fueled my resolve to finish tearing down the delusional world they lived in. "Jealous?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed down the long corridor. "You think I am jealous of a woman whose husband runs a pyramid scheme? You think I am jealous of a man who is about to spend the next 15 years in a federal penitentiary wearing an orange jumpsuit? Let me show you exactly what I am so supposedly jealous of." I unlatched my leather briefcase, reached inside, and pulled out a thick stack of financial documents secured with a heavy binder clip. I had printed these specific bank statements this morning, anticipating this exact confrontation. I slammed the stack of papers directly against my father's chest, forcing him to grab them before they scattered all over the marble floor. "Read it." "Howard," I commanded, dropping all pretense of familial respect. "Read the highlighted sections on the second page." My father fumbled with the papers, his hands shaking with a mixture of fury and sudden apprehension. Sylvia leaned over his shoulder, her tear-filled eyes squinting at the dense columns of numbers. "What is this garbage?" Howard muttered, scanning the documents. "Those are the internal ledger statements from Horizon Apex Capital," I explained, watching the confusion slowly morph into dread on their faces. "Notice the wire transfer dated 6 months ago. The one for exactly $2 million. It came directly from your joint retirement account. We invested that money with Terrence." Sylvia snapped defensively, though her voice wavered. "He guaranteed us a 12% annual return. He is a financial genius. He was growing our nest egg. He was liquidating your nest egg." "Sylvia," I corrected her sharply. "Flip to the next page. Look at where your $2 million went within 48 hours of the wire transfer." Howard flipped the page, his eyes darting back and forth across the highlighted transaction records. The color drained from his face for the second time that morning. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Let me translate the financial jargon for you," I said, leaning in closer. "Your golden son-in-law did not invest a single dime of your retirement fund into the market. He used your $2 million to pay off 3 early investors who were threatening to report him to the authorities for missing dividends. He took your life savings and handed it directly to strangers to keep his pyramid scheme from collapsing. Your money is completely gone." "That is a lie," Sylvia gasped, grabbing my father's arm. "Howard, tell her she is lying. Tell her Terrence would never do that to us." Howard remained completely silent, staring at the undeniable proof in his hands. The routing numbers matched. The account names matched. The reality of their financial ruin was staring them right in the face. "But the absolute best part," I continued, my voice ringing with righteous satisfaction, "is where you got that $2 million. You did not just empty your savings accounts. I pulled the property deeds from public records. You took out a massive second mortgage on the family estate to hand that cash over to a criminal. You leveraged the house you have owned for 30 years to fund a scam. Sylvia let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with both hands. The facade of their wealthy, untouchable lifestyle was shattering into a million irreparable pieces right there in the courthouse hallway. 8 years ago, I said, my tone turning to pure ice. I came to you begging for a $10,000 loan to help cover my first semester of law school tuition. You looked me in the eye, Howard, and told me that giving me money for education was a terrible investment. You said I would fail out in a month and embarrass the family name. You refused to give your own daughter $10,000 for her future, but you eagerly mortgaged your entire home to hand $2 million to a fraudster just because he wore a nice suit and stroked your ego. They had nothing to say. The profound arrogance that had fueled their entire existence was instantly evaporated by the crushing weight of their own catastrophic stupidity. I took a step back, adjusting the strap of my briefcase on my shoulder. You are right about one thing, Howard. I am a very successful lawyer. And as a successful lawyer, I can tell you exactly what happens next. The federal government is going to seize every remaining asset tied to Horizon Apex Capital. Your $2 million is gone, and the bank will be foreclosing on your heavily mortgaged estate within the next 6 months. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the hearing room pushed open again. Brittany stumbled out into the hallway looking like a complete wreck. Her expensive makeup was smeared all over her face, and she was frantically tapping the screen of her smartphone with shaking fingers. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she stared at the banking application on her phone. Mom, Dad. Brittany gasped, her voice shrill with rising panic. I just tried to wire money from our joint checking account to pay the criminal defense retainer fee for Terrence. It says the transaction is denied. It says every single one of our bank accounts has a zero available balance. Brittany kept furiously tapping the glass screen of her luxury smartphone, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the surface in a frantic rhythm. She hit the refresh button on her banking application over and over again, as if sheer willpower could magically summon the millions she thought she possessed. The bright red error message remained stubbornly plastered across her screen, a glaring digital testament to her immediate financial ruin. Zero available balance. Sylvia repeated, her voice barely a hollow whisper. Her knees seemed to buckle slightly, and Howard had to wrap a thick arm around her waist to keep her from collapsing onto the polished marble floor. What do you mean, zero? You and Terrence have millions in offshore accounts. You have trust funds for the children. You have the platinum portfolios. Brittany looked up from her phone, her eyes wild and bloodshot. The expensive mascara she had carefully applied this morning was now a dark, chaotic mess running down her cheeks. I tried the offshore accounts, she gasped, struggling to pull air into her lungs. I tried the corporate accounts. I tried the emergency slush fund Terrence set up in the Cayman Islands. They are all locked. Every single login gives me a federal compliance error code. I cannot even access my personal checking account to buy a cup of coffee. I stood a few feet away, watching the absolute destruction of my sister and her false empire. I adjusted my grip on my leather briefcase, feeling the satisfying weight of the legal documents inside. That is because the federal government does not play games when it comes to securities fraud. I explained, my voice cutting through their mounting panic with surgical precision. When I filed the injunction against Horizon Apex Capital, I did not just target the corporate entity. The Securities and Exchange Commission cast a massive, impenetrable net over every single financial asset tied to Terrence and his associates. Brittany whirled around to face me, her expression twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You did this!" she screamed, pointing her phone at me like a weapon. "You stole my money! Turn it back on right now. Call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. You have to fix this, Camilla." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Turn it back on. Do you honestly think I have a magic switch in my office that controls the United States Department of Justice? The money is gone, Brittany. It was never your money to begin with. It was stolen money. It was the life savings of innocent teachers, retired firefighters, and apparently our own foolish parents. You have been walking around the magnificent mile buying $20,000 Hermes bags and taking first-class flights to Dubai on the backs of defrauded investors. Howard's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. He lunged forward, stopping just inches from my face. "Fix this right now, Camilla. You are a lawyer. You know how to manipulate the system. You call the judge. You tell him we need access to our funds. We need to hire a criminal defense attorney for Terrence immediately. You cannot hire a criminal defense attorney with stolen funds, Howard." I stated coldly, not backing down a single inch. Any lawyer who accepts a retainer fee knowing the money was acquired through a Ponzi scheme commits a federal crime. Terrence is going to have to rely on a public defender. And as for your funds, they are frozen as part of the asset forfeiture process. The government will seize everything to pay back the victims. Brittany's hands were shaking so violently, she dropped her phone. It clattered against the marble floor, the screen cracking instantly. She did not even bend down to pick it up. Her entire reality was dissolving before her eyes. The luxury cars, the penthouse apartment, the exclusive country club memberships, all of it was evaporating into thin air. She was realizing second by agonizing second that she was about to become completely destitute. "But my credit cards!" Brittany stammered, her chest heaving as a full-blown panic attack set in. "I have platinum cards. I have unlimited credit lines. I can just use those until this gets sorted out." I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep, profound sense of vindication. Those credit lines were secured against Terrence's fraudulent investment portfolio. When the portfolio was seized by the federal government this morning, the banks immediately triggered a default clause. "Your credit limit is exactly $0. You cannot swipe a card. You cannot write a check. You cannot wire a single cent." Sylvia let out a loud, piercing wail that echoed down the long courthouse corridor. She buried her face in Howard's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "My house!" Sylvia cried out, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. "Howard, our house is gone. The retirement money is gone. We have absolutely nothing left." Howard wrapped both arms around his weeping wife, glaring at me with a toxic mixture of hatred and profound desperation. "You are enjoying this," he snarled, his voice trembling with raw emotion. "You are standing there enjoying watching your own family lose everything." "I am not enjoying your suffering, Howard," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "I am enjoying the fact that for the first time in 33 years, you are finally experiencing the consequences of your own actions. You chose to fund a criminal because he stroked your massive ego. You chose to disown your own daughter because she refused to fit into your superficial mold. You chose to sign a perjured affidavit this morning to destroy my legal career. You built this exact nightmare with your own two hands." Brittany fell against the marble wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth. "What am I going to do?" she whimpered, the arrogant facade completely stripped away. "Terrence is in jail. I do not have a job. I do not have any money. The federal agents are going to take the penthouse. I am going to be out on the street. You should probably start looking for a minimum wage job," I suggested, casually adjusting the collar of my tailored suit. "I hear the coffee shops in the financial district are always hiring. Maybe you can serve lattes to the federal agents who are currently raiding your husband's corporate office." I turned on my heel, my expensive leather heels clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. I did not look back at the pathetic, sobbing mess they had become. I walked toward the main elevator bank, pressing the down button with a steady, victorious hand. As the silver doors slid open, I could still hear my mother wailing in the distance, mourning the loss of her precious social status and her stolen wealth. The elevator doors closed, shutting out their desperate cries and sealing their fate. They were left with absolutely nothing but the crushing, inescapable reality of their impending poverty. The drive from the downtown courthouse to my private residence in Winnetka usually took 45 minutes. Today, sitting in the back of my hired town car, the journey felt incredibly fast. I watched the Chicago skyline fade into the rearview mirror, replaced by the lush, sprawling properties of the North Shore. For 8 years, I had maintained this sanctuary in absolute secrecy. My family believed I lived in a cramped, noisy apartment struggling to make ends meet. They had no idea that my success had afforded me a highly secure modernist estate hidden behind 10-foot stone walls and heavy wrought iron gates. I stepped out of the car, breathed in the crisp evening air, and unlocked my custom glass and steel front door. The silence of the foyer was a welcome contrast to the hysterical screaming I had left behind at the courthouse. I slipped off my expensive heels, walked into my state-of-the-art kitchen, and poured myself a generous glass of vintage Barolo. I had earned it. I had just taken my first sip when the perimeter breach alarm chimed sharply through the smart home speakers. I frowned, setting my wine glass on the quartz island. I picked up the security tablet mounted on the wall and pulled up the live camera feeds. The high-definition night vision showed exactly what I had hoped to avoid, but entirely expected. Howard, Sylvia, and Brittany were marching aggressively up my manicured driveway. They must have tailgated a delivery truck through the main security gate. My father was leading the charge, his face red and contorted with anger. Sylvia was trailing closely behind him, clutching her designer purse like a shield, while Brittany stumbled in her ruined heels, looking frantically at the towering exterior of my home. They reached the front porch and began pounding furiously on the heavy oak and glass door. The dull thudding echoed through my peaceful hallway. "Camilla, open this door right now!" Howard bellowed, his voice distorted but clearly audible through the external microphones. "We know you are in there. Open the door, or I am going to break a window." A normal person would have triggered the panic button and waited for the local police to arrive and arrest them for trespassing. But I was not a normal person, and I was not finished playing this game. I wanted them to see exactly what they had thrown away. I wanted them to stand inside the physical manifestation of my hard work and realize their own profound inadequacy. I tapped the unlock icon on the tablet. The heavy deadbolts retracted with a loud mechanical clunk. I pulled the door open, standing squarely in the threshold, holding my glass of red wine. My father lunged forward, raising his hand as if he were going to push past me, but he stopped dead in his tracks the second he crossed the threshold. The sheer scale and immense luxury of my home hit them all like a physical blow. The soaring 20-foot ceilings, the sweeping floating staircase, the imported Italian marble floors, and the original modern art hanging on the walls painted a picture of undeniable, overwhelming wealth. This was not the home of a struggling paralegal. This was the fortress of a legal titan. Howard's mouth hung open. He looked around the grand foyer, his aggressive posture momentarily deflating as his brain tried to process the reality of my success. Sylvia gasped softly, her eyes darting from the crystal chandelier above to the immaculate, expansive living room, visible just beyond the hallway. Even Brittany, completely consumed by her own financial ruin, stopped crying long enough to stare in absolute shock at the massive sweeping windows, overlooking my private heated pool. "You have 30 seconds to explain how you bypassed my security gate before I trigger the silent alarm and have you all arrested for trespassing," I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the marble walls. Howard shook his head, snapping out of his momentary trance. The arrogance quickly returned to his face, masking his obvious intimidation. "Do not threaten us with the police, Camilla. We are your family. We followed you from the courthouse. You are going to invite us into your living room, and we are going to fix the disaster you created today. You have to drop the case against Terrence immediately." I took a slow sip of my wine, maintaining unrelenting eye contact with my father. "Drop the case. Do you lack a fundamental understanding of how the federal government operates? I am a corporate litigator representing defrauded clients. I do not have the power to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation and tell them to kindly release a man who stole millions of dollars. Terrence committed federal wire fraud. The Department of Justice has him in custody." Sylvia pushed past my father, grabbing my forearm with her trembling, manicured hands. I yanked my arm away, instantly stepping back. You have to save him, Camilla, Sylvia pleaded, launching into her practiced routine of emotional manipulation. Her voice trembled with fake, calculated vulnerability. Terrence is your brother-in-law. He is the father of your sister children. If he goes to federal prison, Brittany and the kids will be completely destitute. They will have nothing. You are a powerful lawyer. You know the judges, you know the prosecutors. You can pull some strings and get the charges reduced. You must protect the family. I stared at my mother, marveling at her bottomless capacity for delusion. Protect the family. Where was this desperate need to protect the family when you threw me out of your house 8 years ago? Where was this fierce family loyalty when you signed a sworn affidavit this morning claiming I was a criminal fraud? You only care about protecting the family when your primary source of stolen wealth is sitting in a holding cell facing 15 years behind bars. Brittany stepped forward, her face twisted with a mixture of raw desperation and lingering entitlement. You owe us, Camilla, she shrieked, gesturing wildly around the grand foyer. Look at this place. Look at how much money you have. You are sitting on millions of dollars while my bank accounts are completely frozen. You are going to call the judge, and you are going to tell him you made a mistake with the injunction. Then you are going to write me a check to cover our legal fees. You are going to fix this because it is entirely your fault. The sheer audacity of her demands hung heavily in the air. They had broken into my secure private estate not to apologize for their betrayal, but to demand that I commit a federal crime to save a scam artist. They actually believed that their status as my parents and sister gave them the ultimate authority to dictate my actions, even when those actions involved extreme legal jeopardy. They were standing in my house entirely surrounded by the undeniable proof of my autonomy and power, yet they still treated me like the obedient, subservient scapegoat they had manufactured in their own minds. I set my wine glass down on a sleek console table near the door. My expression hardened into a mask of pure, unyielding resolve. I am not calling a judge. I am not dropping the case. And I am certainly not writing a check to cover the legal fees of a man who funded your luxury vacations by stealing the life savings of innocent people. Howard's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He took a threatening step toward me, raising his voice to a deafening roar. You ungrateful, vindictive little girl. You are going to do exactly what we tell you to do. We are not leaving this house until you fix this situation and save your sister from living on the street. You are going to save this family, or I swear to God, I will make you regret the day you were born. I stared directly into my father's enraged, bloodshot eyes, completely unbothered by his booming voice, echoing off the vaulted ceilings of my foyer. The physical intimidation that had worked so effectively when I was a teenager now felt pathetic, like watching a stray dog bark at a reinforced steel door. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply let his empty threat hang in the silent air between us, allowing the sheer absurdity of his position to settle over the room. Sylvia, sensing that Howard's aggressive tactics were failing to produce the desired submission, immediately shifted her strategy. She stepped in front of my father, her hands clasped together against her chest, in a gesture of profound, manufactured agony. The tears that had dried on her cheeks suddenly began flowing again, fresh and heavy. Camilla, please listen to us, Sylvia sobbed, her voice trembling with the practiced cadence of a seasoned martyr. You have to understand that everything we ever did was for your own good. We were hard on you because we saw your potential. We knew you needed a strong push to achieve greatness. If we had coddled you the way we coddled your sister, you never would have become this incredibly successful lawyer. You owe your resilience to us. We built this fierce independence in you. I felt a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. The psychological manipulation was so deeply ingrained in her DNA that she could look at the daughter she had emotionally battered, financially abandoned, and publicly humiliated, and somehow claim credit for her success. You are actually trying to convince me that your cruelty was a parenting strategy? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think abandoning me to drown in student loan debt while you bought Brittany luxury sports cars was an exercise in character building. You called me stupid Sylvia. You told me I was an embarrassment to the family name. You sat in a disciplinary hearing this very morning and swore under oath that I was a criminal fraud incapable of passing the bar exam. Do not stand in my house and try to rebrand your toxic favoritism as tough love. Sylvia reached out trying to grab my hand, but I stepped out of her reach. But look at what you have, Sylvia pleaded, gesturing wildly toward the expansive living room and the glowing blue water of the indoor pool visible through the glass walls. You have more money than you could ever spend in a single lifetime. You have this massive empty fortress. Brittany is going to lose her penthouse by the end of the week. The federal government is seizing her bank accounts. Her children are going to be homeless. You have 6 bedrooms in this estate. You have a guest house. You have to let them move in here. You have to share what you have because that is what sisters do. I looked at Brittany, who was standing slightly behind our parents. She had stopped crying and was now looking around my grand foyer with a calculating, entitled gleam in her eye. She was already mentally measuring the space, picking out which wing of my mansion she would claim as her own. She actually believed that because she shared my bloodline, she was automatically entitled to the fruits of my grueling labor, even after spending her entire adult life treating me like garbage. I am not running a charity for the wives of convicted felons, I stated flatly. Brittany can move into a cheap roadside motel. Howard's face darkened again, the brief pause in his aggression evaporating. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a folded stack of legal paper. He snapped the thick pages open and aggressively shoved them toward me. We knew you would be stubborn about this, Howard snarled, tapping his thick finger against the top page of the document. So we had a lawyer draw this up this afternoon while we were doing damage control. Since you refused to use your influence to drop the federal case against Terrence, you are going to compensate your sister for the financial destruction you caused her family. I glanced down at the document he was aggressively pushing into my personal space. It was a quitclaim deed. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was a hastily prepared legal instrument designed to transfer real property rights. Read it. Howard demanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. It transfers 50% ownership of this estate directly into Brittany's name. It also grants her exclusive, unrestricted access to the guest house and the East Wing. You are going to sign this deed right now, Camilla. You are going to sign it, and we are going to file it with the county clerk tomorrow morning. This will ensure that Brittany has a permanent secure asset that the federal government cannot seize because it will be tied to your pristine legal name. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the demand left me momentarily speechless. They had not just come to beg for shelter, they had come to extort me. They had brought a legal document to my home intending to force me to surrender half of my multi-million-dollar property to a woman who had spent her morning trying to get me disbarred and thrown in prison. Sylvia chimed in again, her voice adopting a sickeningly sweet, coaxing tone. It is the only fair solution, Camilla. You have so much, and your sister has lost everything. If you sign the house over to her, we will forgive you for what you did to Terrence. We will welcome you back into the family. We can all be close again. You can finally have the family bond you have always wanted. All you have to do is sign the paper. They were offering me conditional love in exchange for half of my net worth. They were dangling the elusive prize of family acceptance, betting that the lonely, rejected girl they had discarded 8 years ago was still desperate enough to buy their affection. I looked at the quitclaim deed in my father's trembling hand. I looked at the signature line at the bottom of the page, waiting for my name. Then I looked up at the 3 of them standing in the middle of my imported marble foyer, acting like they held all the power in the universe. You want me to sign away half of my estate? I asked, my voice perfectly level. You want me to give 50% of my sanctuary to a woman who funded her luxury lifestyle with stolen retirement money? It is your duty as a sister, Brittany snapped, finding her voice again. You owe me for ruining my husband. You owe me for destroying my life. Sign the paper, Camilla, and maybe I will not sue you for defamation. I let out a slow, steady breath. I reached out and took the quitclaim deed from my father's hand. His eyes lit up with a brief, triumphant flash. Sylvia smiled clearly, believing her gaslighting had successfully broken down my defenses. Brittany crossed her arms, looking smug and victorious. They honestly thought they had won. They honestly believed they had broken the high-powered corporate litigator in her own hallway. I held the document in both hands, feeling the crisp weight of the paper. I looked at my father's expectant face. Then, with deliberate, excruciating slowness, I gripped the top of the pages and tore the legal document straight down the middle. The loud ripping sound echoed sharply through the grand foyer, completely shattering their pathetic delusion instantly and permanently. I let the two halves of the expensive legal paper flutter from my fingers. They drifted down slowly, landing directly on the tips of my father's expensive Italian leather shoes. For a fraction of a second, the grand foyer was so quiet you could hear the gentle hum of the climate control system operating behind the walls. Then the brutal reality of my rejection fully registered on their faces. Howard's face morphed from expectant triumph into absolute, unfiltered fury. He took a heavy step forward, raising his clenched fist, as if he were going to strike me right there in my own home. "You insolent, arrogant little brat," he roared, his voice cracking violently with the strain of his anger. "You just threw away your only chance at redemption. You are going to sign a new copy of that deed, or I swear I will tear this house apart piece by piece until you do." I did not even blink. I did not flinch or cower away from him. I stood my ground, looking directly at the raised fist of a man who had spent 3 decades trying to make me feel utterly small. "Are you going to physically assault a senior partner of a major law firm in her own foyer, Howard?" I asked, my voice chillingly calm and entirely devoid of fear. "Because I highly recommend you look up toward the ceiling before you make your next move." Howard froze in his tracks. Sylvia and Brittany both followed my gaze upward. Tucked discreetly into the corners of the vaulted ceiling, glowing with faint red indicator lights, were state-of-the-art high-definition security cameras. They were equipped with motion sensors, night vision, and most importantly, crystal-clear audio recording capabilities. "Every single word you have spoken since you breached my front gate has been recorded," I stated, pacing slowly around the kitchen island to put a barrier of white quartz between us. "Every demand to drop a federal investigation, every attempt to extort me for real estate in exchange for dropping your fabricated disciplinary complaint, every threat of physical violence, it is all safely backed up to a secure cloud server that my firm's security team monitors 24 hours a day." Sylvia's hands dropped limply to her sides. She stared at the small red lights blinking in the corners of the room, her carefully constructed mask of maternal concern melting away into pure, unadulterated terror. "You are recording us," she whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "In your own home. When your family consists of pathological liars and grifters, surveillance is not paranoia," I replied sharply. "It is a basic necessity." And it brings me to my next point. I walked over to the sleek console table near the entryway, opened the slim drawer, and pulled out a thick manila folder of my own. I had prepared it earlier that afternoon, anticipating they would attempt some sort of retaliation or manipulation once the reality of Terrence's arrest fully set in. I walked back and shoved the folder directly against Howard's chest, mirroring the exact aggressive motion he had used with the quitclaim deed just moments ago. "Open it," I commanded. Howard's hands were trembling as he fumbled with the thick folder. He opened it, revealing several pages of densely printed legal text with specific passages highlighted in bright yellow ink. Brittany leaned over his arm, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice lacking its previous venom, replaced now by a creeping sense of absolute dread. "That is a printout of the Illinois-compiled statutes and the United States Code," I explained, crossing my arms and looking at the three of them with absolute contempt. Specifically, it details the legal definitions and mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for perjury, filing a false administrative report, extortion, and witness tampering. Howard swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the highlighted paragraphs detailing lengthy prison terms and exorbitant financial penalties. This morning I continued, my voice echoing like a gavel striking a wooden block. You three stood in front of a disciplinary committee and submitted a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury. You lied to a state-appointed judge to destroy my career and protect a man who was actively running a Ponzi scheme. That is a serious felony. Sylvia let out a quiet, strangled gasp. We did not know he was running a Ponzi scheme, she pleaded, stepping backward toward the heavy oak door. We thought you were just being vindictive. We were trying to protect our son-in-law and our investments. Ignorance is not a defense when you sign a sworn statement claiming you have first-hand knowledge of my alleged fraud. I snapped back, cutting off her pathetic excuse instantly. You swore I stole a senior partner identity. You swore I was an uncredentialed paralegal. You deliberately lied to the state bar to obstruct justice. And tonight you trespassed on my private property to extort me for a multi-million-dollar real estate asset, threatening me with continued harassment if I did not sign it over. All of which is now meticulously recorded in high-definition audio and video. Brittany's legs seemed to give out completely. She leaned heavily against the marble wall, her hands clutching her head. You are going to send us to prison, she whimpered, the reality of her actions finally crushing her bloated ego. You are going to send your own parents and your sister to a federal penitentiary. I stepped closer, closing the distance until I was mere inches from my sister's tear-stained face. I leaned in, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. I do not have to send you anywhere, Brittany. You walked yourselves right into a federal perjury trap because you were too arrogant to believe I could ever outsmart you. You thought you could walk into a hearing lie through your teeth and face zero consequences because I was just your stupid, inadequate punching bag. I turned my attention back to Howard and Sylvia, who looked like they had aged 20 years in the span of 10 minutes. The bravado was entirely gone. The country club elitism was shattered. They were just two terrified, financially ruined criminals standing in the foyer of the daughter they had discarded. I am giving you exactly 60 seconds to get off my property, I announced, pulling my smartphone from my blazer pocket and unlocking the bright screen. If you are not on the other side of my security gate by the time this minute is up, I am forwarding the security footage of your extortion attempt directly to my contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the State Attorney Office. They are already building a massive case against Terrence, and I guarantee they would love to add his accomplices to the indictment. Howard's mouth opened a desperate apology, or perhaps another plea forming on his lips, but the absolute zero tolerance in my eyes silenced him instantly. He looked down at the torn pieces of the quitclaim deed on the marble floor, then back at the highlighted perjury statutes trembling in his hand. The fight was over. The war was completely lost. Howard grabbed Sylvia by the arm and yanked her toward the front door. Brittany scrambled to her feet, her ruined designer heels slipping on the polished stone as she frantically followed them. They did not say another word. They did not issue any more threats. They practically tripped over each other as they burst through the heavy oak door and sprinted down my illuminated driveway toward the front gate, running like terrified fugitives fleeing an active crime scene. I stood in the doorway watching their retreating figures disappear into the cool Chicago night. I raised my hand and tapped the security tablet on the wall. The heavy wrought iron gate slowly swung shut behind them with a loud definitive clang, locking securely. I closed my solid oak front door, engaged the titanium deadbolts, and walked back to my kitchen island. I picked up my glass of vintage Barolo, took a slow, satisfying sip, and enjoyed the beautiful, absolute silence of my total victory. The beautiful, absolute silence of my total victory lasted exactly 48 hours. By Thursday morning, the tranquility of my secure estate was shattered not by a physical break-in, but by a digital shockwave. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the final asset forfeiture documents for the Securities and Exchange Commission, when my work phone began vibrating relentlessly against the quartz countertop. The caller ID flashed the name of a junior associate at my firm. I answered, expecting a routine update on our corporate filings. Instead, I heard a panicked, breathless voice. "Camilla, you need to check Twitter and TikTok right now," the associate urged, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Your sister posted a video last night. It already has 3 million views." The firm switchboard is completely overwhelmed with angry calls. The public relations department is having a massive crisis meeting in 20 minutes. I disconnected the call, my expression hardening into a cold, analytical mask. I opened the social media applications on my secure tablet. It did not take long to find the source of the digital firestorm. Brittany's face was plastered across the top trending page. She had utilized her professional background as a public relations director to craft the ultimate weaponized victim narrative. The video was a masterclass in modern digital manipulation. Brittany sat on the floor of her luxury penthouse, wearing a plain gray sweater instead of her usual designer brands. Her hair was deliberately messy, and her face was scrubbed completely free of makeup. She stared directly into the camera, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, portraying the image of a completely broken, devastated wife and mother. "My name is Brittany." She began, her voice quivering with perfectly timed vulnerability. "And 2 days ago, my estranged sister, a wealthy corporate lawyer, used her legal connections to destroy my family. She maliciously targeted my husband's investment firm and had him dragged away by federal agents in front of our entire family." I watched, my jaw clenching, as she seamlessly transitioned from playing the victim to weaponizing modern social justice rhetoric. Brittany wiped a tear away and looked bravely into the camera lens. "My husband is a brilliant self-made Black man who built a thriving financial institution from the ground up. He dedicated his life to creating generational wealth for our community. But my sister has always harbored a deep, vicious jealousy toward our happiness. She could not stand seeing a successful Black-owned business thrive, so she abused the legal system to manufacture a fake federal investigation. She froze our bank accounts. She left me and my young children completely destitute, without a single dollar to buy groceries. She is trying to silence us, but I refuse to let her racist, vindictive vendetta destroy a good man legacy." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her lies made my blood run ice cold. She had completely omitted the fact that Terrence was running a verified Ponzi scheme. She conveniently forgot to mention that he had stolen $2 million from our own parents' retirement fund. She erased the truth about her perjury attempt at the disciplinary hearing and her subsequent extortion attempt at my home. Instead, she painted me as a corrupt, racist villain abusing my legal power to crush a minority-owned business out of pure spite. The internet devoured her fabricated narrative instantly. The comments section was an absolute war zone of digital outrage. Millions of strangers who knew nothing about corporate law or federal securities fraud were suddenly experts on my supposed moral corruption. They demanded my immediate disbarment. They called for my arrest. They tracked down the name of my law firm and launched a coordinated, vicious campaign to destroy our online reputation. I scrolled through the trending hashtags associated with my name. People were posting the address of my firm downtown. Influencers were stitching her video, adding their own outraged commentary about systemic injustice and corrupt corporate lawyers. Brittany had successfully mobilized an angry, misinformed digital mob to fight the battle she had lost so spectacularly in the real world. My phone vibrated again. This time it was the managing partner of my firm, a man who rarely panicked about anything. "Camilla, we have news vans parked outside the building lobby," he stated bluntly. "Our biggest corporate clients are calling to ask why their lead litigator is currently the main villain on national social media. Brittany PR campaign is incredibly effective. She is framing this as a civil rights issue, and the media loves a scandalous corporate takedown. We need you to issue a public statement immediately, or we might have to place you on administrative leave until the heat dies down." I stood up, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking my pool, and took a slow, deliberate breath. I am not issuing a public statement, I replied, my voice projecting absolute unshakable confidence. If I go online and try to defend myself against a viral crying video, I will only validate her narrative. The internet does not care about facts when they have an emotional victim to rally behind. I am not going to fight a PR war with a woman who is currently funding her life with stolen money. But Camilla, the managing partner, argued, his tone reflecting the intense pressure from the board. She is destroying your reputation. She is dragging the firm name through the mud. We cannot just sit here and let her dictate the public narrative. If we do not fight back, the court of public opinion will convict you before Terrence even sees a judge. I smiled, a sharp, predatory expression forming on my face. The court of public opinion cannot issue subpoenas, I stated coldly. Brittany is treating this like a reality television scandal. She thinks she can bully me into dropping the federal asset freeze by sending an internet mob to harass my employer. But she just made a fatal, catastrophic legal error. By taking this to a public platform and making specific defamatory factual claims about an ongoing federal investigation, she has officially waived her right to privacy regarding her involvement in the fraud. What are you planning to do? The managing partner asked, his anxiety momentarily replaced by professional curiosity. I walked back to my kitchen island and picked up my secure tablet. I am going to let her enjoy her 15 minutes of viral fame, I explained, pulling up the digital filing system for the federal court. I want her to feel untouchable. I want her to post as many videos as she can. I want her to thoroughly document her own perjury for the entire world to see. Because while she is busy fighting a public relations battle on her smartphone, I am going to use the discovery phase of the civil litigation to legally compel every single deleted text message, bank statement, and direct message she has sent in the last 2 years. I disconnected the call, my mind already outlining the precise legal strategy that would dismantle her digital empire. Brittany thought she could weaponize the internet to save herself from poverty. She thought crying on camera would shield her from federal scrutiny. She had absolutely no idea that by opening her mouth on a public platform, she had just handed me the exact legal justification I needed to tear her entire life apart under oath. The digital mob might be screaming my name today, but the law always has the final word. 48 hours later, the viral outrage reached its peak, catching the attention of the exact type of bottom-feeding legal parasite I had anticipated. Enter Bradley Pierce. He was a slick, media-hungry attorney who built his entire career on television cameras rather than courtroom victories. Bradley was notorious in the Chicago legal circuit for taking highly controversial, emotionally charged cases pro bono just to secure a primetime slot on the evening news. He did not care about the actual law. He only cared about his personal brand. Brittany had just handed him the most explosive public relations case of the year on a silver platter. I was sitting in my corner office on the 40th floor, reviewing the preliminary discovery timelines for the federal investigation, when my television caught my attention. Local news networks had interrupted their regular broadcasts for a live press conference. I picked up the remote and unmuted the screen, leaning back in my leather chair. There was Bradley Pierce standing on the steps of the federal courthouse. He wore a loud pinstriped suit that screamed desperation, his hair slicked back perfectly. Standing directly behind him, playing their roles to absolute perfection, were Brittany Howard and Sylvia. Brittany was wearing another plain, oversized sweater, looking appropriately devastated and holding a crumpled tissue. My parents stood flanking her, their faces arranged in masks of profound, dignified sorrow. They looked like a family destroyed by tragedy rather than conspirators who tried to extort me just 3 days prior. "Good morning," Bradley began, leaning into the microphones with practiced outrage. "I am stepping forward today to announce that my firm is offering full pro bono legal representation to Brittany Miller and her family. We are here to fight back against a gross, malicious abuse of corporate legal power. For too long, elite corporate lawyers have used their influence to crush minority-owned businesses and destroy innocent families out of sheer vindictiveness. Today we are putting a stop to it. I took a sip of my hot black coffee, watching the circus unfold with clinical detachment. My client Bradley, continued, his voice rising in theatrical anger, has had her entire life ripped apart by a fraudulent, racially motivated asset freeze orchestrated by her estranged sister, Camilla. This action was taken not for justice, but to bankrupt a successful Black entrepreneur, Terrence Miller. Terrence is currently sitting in a federal holding cell based on manufactured evidence, and his wife and children are facing imminent homelessness. The reporters shouted questions, but Bradley held up a hand demanding silence for his grand finale. He pulled a crisp legal document from his briefcase and held it up for the cameras. Therefore, I am publicly issuing a formal cease and desist order directed at Camilla and her firm Vanguard Croft and Associates, Bradley declared, staring directly into the camera lens as if looking right at me. We are demanding the immediate withdrawal of the federal injunction and the immediate release of all frozen bank accounts tied to the Miller family. If this malicious corporate overreach is not reversed within 24 hours, we will be filing a massive civil rights and defamation lawsuit against Camilla and her partners. We will not allow the corrupt legal elite to destroy another Black-owned business and leave an innocent mother destitute. The press conference concluded with Brittany burying her face in her hands while Sylvia wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. It was a spectacular performance. It was also legal suicide. My office door swung open abruptly. Harrison Croft, the senior managing partner of my firm, stepped inside. His face was a mask of cold, restrained panic. He had just watched the same broadcast. Bradley Pierce just declared war on this firm on national television, Harrison said, closing the door behind him and pacing across my office. He is threatening a civil rights lawsuit, Camilla. Do you understand the optics of this? We represent half the Fortune 500 companies in this city. We cannot afford to be branded as a firm that uses federal injunctions to conduct racist personal vendettas. The board of directors is terrified. They want to settle this immediately. They want you to lift the asset freeze and let Pierce claim his little public relations victory before we lose our biggest clients. I remained entirely calm, setting my coffee mug down on my mahogany desk. Harrison, you have been a litigator for 40 years. Since when do we let a television lawyer dictate our legal strategy using a completely unenforceable public cease and desist order? Harrison stopped pacing and rubbed his temples. Camilla, this is not a courtroom. This is a media circus. Bradley Pierce knows he does not have the legal authority to force you to drop a federal injunction. But he also knows that if he screams loudly enough on the news, our corporate clients will get nervous and force our hand. He is using public outrage as leverage. I stood up, walked around my desk, and handed Harrison a thick, bound dossier. I am not lifting the freeze, and I am certainly not backing down because Bradley Pierce wants to play savior on television. Do you know what Pierce actually just did by holding that press conference? Harrison looked down at the dossier, then back up at me. He just made this a public nightmare. No. I corrected him, a sharp smile forming on my face. He just made himself the attorney of record for a federal fraud conspiracy. Bradley Pierce is arrogant, and he is notoriously sloppy. He took this case pro bono for the media clout, without actually reviewing the financial ledgers or the discovery files. He took Brittany Tears at face value because it fit his preferred narrative. He has absolutely no idea that Terrence was running a verified Ponzi scheme, and he has no idea that Brittany was actively spending the stolen money. I walked back to my desk and tapped the stack of subpoenas I had drafted the night before. By publicly declaring himself her legal counsel and threatening civil litigation, Bradley has officially opened the door for mutual discovery. He thinks he is going to depose me and embarrass our firm. But what he actually did was give me the legal jurisdiction to drag his client into a sworn deposition room. Harrison's eyes widened as the realization of my strategy finally hit him. You are going to depose Brittany under oath. I am going to depose her. I confirmed, my voice carrying absolute certainty. I am going to subpoena every single bank statement, every deleted text message, and every flight itinerary from the last 2 years. Bradley Pierce just handed me the keys to his client destruction. He wants a civil lawsuit. I am going to give him one. And when I am finished presenting the evidence in that deposition room, Bradley Pierce is going to realize he just staked his entire legal career on defending a woman who willfully participated in defrauding her own parents out of $2 million. Harrison looked at the dossier again, a slow, predatory grin replacing his previous anxiety. The firm will back you, Camilla. Do what you need to do. I sat back down in my leather chair, pulling my keyboard toward me. The digital mob had their fun. Bradley Pierce had his press conference. Now it was time to bring them out of the media circus and into the cold, unforgiving reality of a federal deposition room. I did not tweet. I did not post a reactive video on social media. I did not issue a carefully crafted public relations statement from the firm. While Brittany spent the next 48 hours performing on every local news station that would hand her a microphone, I remained a complete digital ghost. The comments on my professional profiles became increasingly vile. People called for my immediate disbarment, labeling me a corporate monster who despised her own family. Strangers sent hateful emails to my business address, demanding I release the frozen funds so a so-called innocent mother could feed her children. My inbox was a wasteland of digital outrage. I routed all non-client communications to a spam folder and instructed my secretary to forward any direct threats to building security. I refused to fight a legal battle in the comments section of a social media application. Bradley Pierce, high on his own media supply, officially filed his civil rights and defamation lawsuit against me and my firm by Friday afternoon. He wanted to use the civil court system to force a quick settlement, assuming our corporate clients would panic and order us to pay him off to make the bad press disappear. He fundamentally misunderstood how the discovery process works. By filing a civil suit, Bradley legally opened the door for mutual discovery. He invited me to look under the hood of his client's entire life. I spent the entire weekend locked in my corner office, drafting the most comprehensive, aggressive subpoenas my career had ever seen. I targeted absolutely everything. I drafted a subpoena for the telecommunications companies demanding complete access to every text message sent and received from Brittany's smartphone over the past 24 months. I drafted subpoenas for the major social media conglomerates, legally compelling them to surrender the archives of her direct messages, including the ones she thought she had permanently deleted. I drafted subpoenas for luxury retailers, international airlines, and five-star hotels demanding itemized receipts of her spending habits. When Bradley Pierce received the massive stack of subpoenas on Monday morning, his manufactured confidence immediately shattered. He filed an emergency motion to quash my requests, marching into the federal courthouse to complain to the presiding judge that I was conducting a malicious, overbroad fishing expedition. He argued passionately that Brittany's personal spending habits and deleted social media messages had absolutely nothing to do with her defamation claim against me. He claimed I was harassing a vulnerable mother. I stood before the federal judge and delivered my counter-argument with lethal precision. "Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, Your Honor," I stated, looking directly at a sweating Bradley Pierce. The plaintiff claims I maliciously labeled her husband a fraud and unlawfully froze their assets to ruin their legitimate business. To prove that my statements and legal actions were factually justified, I must demonstrate that her husband was running a criminal enterprise and that the plaintiff was actively spending the illicit proceeds. Her digital communications and financial records are the foundational evidence of that truth. If she wants to sue me for calling her a fraud, I have the legal right to prove that she is one. The federal judge agreed completely. He denied Bradley's motion to quash in its entirety and signed the orders to compel. Brittany had exactly 7 days to surrender her electronic devices to a court-appointed forensic extraction team. Furthermore, the tech giants were legally bound to turn over their server backups directly to my firm. The digital harvest arrived 2 weeks later. It was a staggering mountain of raw data. I assembled a tight-knit team of 3 trusted junior associates, swearing them to absolute confidentiality. We locked ourselves in a secure conference room surrounded by whiteboards, high-speed computers, and towering bankers' boxes. For 72 straight hours, we combed through terabytes of recovered data, piecing together the timeline of a massive financial crime. Brittany was incredibly careless. She actually believed that pressing the delete button on her smartphone permanently erased her digital footprint. She did not comprehend that data lives forever on corporate servers. We found the offshore wire transfer requests she had tried to wipe from her outbox. We found the digital receipts for a $200,000 diamond necklace purchased just 3 days after my parents mortgaged their family estate. But the crown jewel of the discovery phase was a series of deleted direct messages between Brittany and Terrence sent via a secure messaging application that she had failed to properly encrypt. In those recovered messages, Terrence explicitly told Brittany that the investment fund was short on capital and that he needed to use her parents' retirement money to cover the older investors. He laid out the entire pyramid scheme in plain text. Brittany did not object. She did not warn our parents. She replied with a string of laughing emojis and told him to make sure he transferred enough extra cash into her private account to cover her upcoming luxury vacation to Dubai. She knew her husband was running a Ponzi scheme. She knew he was financially gutting our own mother and father. And she actively, gleefully participated in the theft to fund her lavish lifestyle. I held the printed transcript of those deleted messages in my hands. The paper felt heavy with the weight of her absolute betrayal. Bradley Pierce had demanded a civil lawsuit to clear his client name. He was about to walk his client straight into a federal prison cell. I took a moment to look out my office window at the sprawling Chicago skyline. My family had spent my entire life trying to convince me I was worthless. They had spent the last month trying to convince the world I was a villain. But they had made the fatal mistake of challenging a woman who knew exactly how to use the law as a weapon. I did not need to scream on the internet to prove my innocence. I had the undeniable, irrefutable truth printed in black and white. I stacked the physical evidence into neat, organized folders and placed them carefully into my leather briefcase. The media circus was officially over. The deposition room. The tense setting of the legal deposition. The rival lawyer acts smug while Brittany plays the innocent victim. It was time to schedule the deposition and watch them burn. My firm 40th floor conference room was designed to intimidate. It featured a massive slab of polished black marble for a table floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the freezing waters of Lake Michigan, and an acoustic design that made every whisper sound like a gavel strike. I arrived 30 minutes early to set the stage perfectly. I arranged my legal pads, my pens, and 3 heavily tabbed banker boxes of printed evidence exactly parallel to the edge of the table. The court reporter was already setting up her stenograph machine in the corner of the room. The professional videographer adjusted the bright lighting on his camera, ensuring the glass lens was perfectly focused on the empty leather chair directly across from me. At precisely 9 in the morning, the heavy glass doors swung open loudly. Bradley Pierce strolled in with the arrogant swagger of a man who firmly thought he had already won the Super Bowl. He wore a bright blue suit that bordered on theatrical, flashing a blindingly white smile that was clearly meant for the camera lens rather than for me. He walked around the marble table inspecting the room as if he were looking to buy the entire skyscraper. Following closely behind him was my sister Brittany. She had perfectly committed to her tragic victim costume. She wore a baggy beige cashmere sweater, loose slacks, and completely flat shoes. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she clutched a crumpled tissue tightly in her trembling hands. Howard and Sylvia trailed behind them, hovering nervously near the wide doorway. Bradley immediately puffed out his chest and pointed at the empty chairs along the back wall. My client requires the continuous presence of her parents for emotional support during this highly traumatic process, Bradley announced loudly, projecting his voice so the videographer microphone would catch his grandstanding. I know standard procedure normally excludes non-parties from the room, but given your documented history of familial abuse, I will file for an immediate continuance if you try to kick them out today. I did not argue with his ridiculous and unprofessional demand. I actually desperately wanted Howard and Sylvia in the room. I wanted them to sit in the very front row for the absolute inescapable destruction of their perfect golden child. You may have them sit by the windows, Bradley, I replied evenly, not bothering to look up from my handwritten notes. As long as they remain completely silent on the official record. Bradley smirked, clearly taking my easy and rapid concession as a definite sign of weakness. He pulled out the heavy chair for Brittany, whispering something seemingly reassuring into her ear before taking his own designated seat across from me. He slammed a remarkably thin leather folder onto the marble table, a stark, pathetic contrast to my towering boxes of solid evidence. Let the record clearly reflect that we are only here to entertain this malicious fishing expedition because we have absolutely nothing to hide. Bradley declared loudly, staring directly into the blinking video camera lens. My client is an innocent mother who has been repeatedly subjected to a cruel, vindictive smear campaign by a bitter sibling. We will answer your questions today, Camilla, but be explicitly warned that every single second you waste today will be added to the massive punitive damages in our upcoming civil rights lawsuit. I completely ignored his pathetic, desperate attempt at courtroom theater. I simply signaled the court reporter to begin her typing. State your full legal name for the record, I instructed smoothly. Brittany sniffled, wiping a non-existent tear from her pale cheek before leaning toward the small black microphone. Brittany Miller, she whispered, her voice shaking with perfectly practiced vulnerability. I spent the first hour methodically establishing the factual baseline. I asked her mundane, routine questions about her educational background, her previous employment history, and her general overall understanding of her husband, investment firm. Brittany played her assigned role flawlessly. She widened her eyes, chewed her bottom lip nervously, and answered every single question with the exact same helpless refrain. She firmly claimed she was just a simple, devoted housewife. She swore under oath that she had absolutely no involvement in Terrence's daily business dealings. She painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture of a traditional mother who focused solely on raising her children and keeping a nice home, completely oblivious to the complex financial mechanics of Horizon Apex Capital. Bradley sat beside her, practically glowing with intense, smug satisfaction. He occasionally interjected with dramatic, unnecessary objections, claiming my routine questions were relentlessly badgering a highly traumatized woman. He was treating the serious legal deposition like a daytime television talk show interview. He arrogantly thought he was completely controlling the narrative. He foolishly thought my continued silence was a sign of defeat. And you had no access to the corporate accounts for Horizon Apex Capital, I asked, keeping my tone strictly conversational and light. You never reviewed the profit margins, the client ledgers, or the monthly investment returns. No, of course not. Brittany answered softly, letting out a long, defeated sigh. Terrence handled all the money for our entire household. I just asked him for a monthly household allowance to buy basic groceries and clothes for the kids. I trusted my husband completely and unconditionally. I had absolutely no idea what he was doing at work. I was just a mother trying to take care of my family. Howard and Sylvia nodded emphatically from their comfortable seats by the large window, casting furious, indignant glares in my immediate direction. They were entirely sold on the impressive theatrical performance. They genuinely believed their favorite daughter was a tragic victim of a ruthless federal misunderstanding that I had maliciously created. I nodded slowly, picking up my black pen and making a single checkmark on my yellow legal pad. I let the heavy silence hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment. The videographer camera kept rolling silently. The court reporter hands hovered expectantly over her machine. Bradley leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a massive, victorious smirk. He thought the deposition was basically over. He thought I had hit a permanent dead end and completely failed to produce a single piece of incriminating evidence against his client. I reached out and placed my hand flat on top of the first heavy banker box sitting beside me. I unlatched the cardboard lid and pulled out a thick, bright red folder. I placed it squarely in the exact middle of the polished black marble table. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly and violently. The sudden appearance of the heavy red folder seemed to suck all the oxygen right out of the enclosed air. Bradley's smug smile faltered slightly as he stared at the thick stack of papers resting inside. "Let us talk about your household allowance, Brittany," I stated clearly, my voice dropping the conversational tone and immediately adopting the sharp surgical edge of a senior corporate prosecutor. I opened the red folder, sliding the first printed document across the wide table until it rested directly beneath her trembling hands, ready to utterly destroy her web of lies. I slid the first printed document across the wide table until it rested directly beneath her trembling hands, ready to utterly destroy her web of lies. "This is an itemized statement from your platinum credit card," I stated, my voice echoing off the marble walls with lethal precision. "I want to direct your attention to page 4, specifically the transactions dated roughly 6 months ago. Please read the highlighted line item for the official record, Brittany." Brittany looked down at the crisp white paper. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She glanced sideways at Bradley, who snatched the document from the table before she could even read it, his eyes darting across the highlighted text. "Objection!" Bradley barked. "This is an egregious invasion of privacy. My client's personal shopping habits have nothing to do with corporate misdeeds. You are attempting to publicly shame a mother for buying groceries. I will not allow you to badger her over mundane expenses. A first-class flight to Dubai and a luxury villa rental is hardly a household necessity, Bradley," I countered smoothly, never breaking eye contact with my sister. The total cost was exactly $85,000, charged directly to a card in her name. "Brittany, did you take a vacation to Dubai 6 months ago?" Brittany swallowed hard, looking at our parents by the window. Sylvia's face had lost its color. "Yes, we took a vacation," Brittany whispered. "Terrence said he closed a major real estate deal and wanted to celebrate our anniversary. I thought he used his bonus. I swear I had no idea where the money came from." I picked up a second document and slid it across the table. Bradley snatched it up, his face turning pale. "This is a certified bank ledger from Horizon Apex Capital," I explained to the camera. "It shows the exact date and time Terrence transferred $2 million from a personal retirement account belonging to Howard and Sylvia into his fraudulent corporate fund. The timestamp on that wire transfer is 9 in the morning on October 12th. I paused, letting the date hang heavily in the room, then slid a third paper across the marble. "This is the itemized receipt from your luxury travel agent. You booked the Dubai vacation on October 12th at exactly 1 in the afternoon, just 4 hours after Terrence liquidated our parents' life savings." Sylvia let out a sharp gasp. Howard shifted violently in his chair. They were beginning to understand the horrifying timeline, realizing their golden child had flown to another continent on the back of their financial ruin. Bradley scrambled to formulate a desperate defense to protect his crumbling narrative. "That is a completely circumstantial coincidence," he declared, though his voice was entirely lacking its usual arrogant boom. "My client already stated under oath that her husband handled the finances. She saw a deposit and assumed it was a legitimate bonus. You cannot prove she knew the origin of those specific funds based solely on timing." I smiled coldly, an expression that immediately made Brittany shrink back into the depths of her leather chair. I reached over and picked up another thick stack of printed receipts from the banker box. "Let us look closely at the specific spending pattern during the luxury trip itself. While in Dubai, your card was charged for a $30,000 custom diamond watch. You spent $15,000 on exclusive designer handbags in a single afternoon. You chartered a private yacht for an evening dinner cruise that cost $12,000. In 10 days, you blew through $250,000. Are you asking this committee to believe you thought your husband received a $250,000 bonus for a single deal? I thought he was doing well," Brittany sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "He told me business was booming. I am just a mother. I do not understand wire transfers. You are trying to make me look like a criminal, but I am a victim too." I leaned forward. "You are not a victim, Brittany. You are an educated public relations director who understands asset management." I pulled the next piece of evidence from the box. This is a signed application for a secondary offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was opened 3 days before your Dubai trip. It requires the physical notarized signatures of both account holders to be legally valid. I deliberately pushed the heavy document across the polished marble table. Is that your distinct ink signature on the bottom line, Brittany? Did you actually fly to a specialized financial notary downtown to open an offshore account designed exclusively to hide these massive stolen assets from the Internal Revenue Service? Bradley's face was sweating. He grabbed the document, staring at the undeniable ink signature. Do not answer that, he instructed sharply. We need a 5-minute recess. My client is visibly distressed and cannot continue under this highly aggressive line of questioning today. I stared directly at him, completely unbothered by his theatrical courtroom demands. There will be absolutely no recess today, I stated firmly. We are currently on the official binding record. I am demonstrating a coordinated, premeditated effort to hide stolen funds. You claimed she was an innocent housewife on a modest allowance. I have just proven she was actively laundering $250,000 through international luxury purchases and offshore tax havens. I looked at Howard and Sylvia sitting silently by the window. Their faces were masks of pure horror. The illusion they had fiercely protected was crumbling. The daughter they worshipped was sitting across from me, sobbing fake tears, while surrounded by the very receipts proving she had financed a glamorous vacation with the money they had mortgaged their home to provide. And I was not even close to being finished yet. The credit card statements only proved how she spent the stolen money. The next folder on my table would prove exactly what she knew while she was spending it. I reached for a small silver remote control resting beside my yellow legal pad. With a single click, the heavy electronic blackout blinds descended over the floor to ceiling windows, plunging the conference room into a stark, dramatic dimness. Another click lowered a massive projection screen from the ceiling directly behind my chair. I tapped a few keys on my laptop. The high-definition projector hummed to life, casting a bright, inescapable rectangle of harsh white light across the polished mahogany walls. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Brittany stopped her theatrical sobbing, her red-rimmed eyes darting nervously toward the glowing screen. Howard and Sylvia leaned forward by the windows, their faces etched with a sickening blend of confusion and mounting dread. I opened a digital file labeled Exhibit D. This, I announced, letting my voice project clearly for the court reporter, and the videographer is a comprehensive transcript of encrypted messages sent between Brittany Miller and her husband, Terrence Miller. These specific messages were routed through a secure third-party communication application. Brittany went to extraordinary lengths to delete this entire conversation history from her personal smartphone. She believed pressing a digital trash can icon permanently erased her involvement in federal wire fraud. She was severely mistaken. The telecommunications companies fully complied with my federal subpoenas. They restored every single deleted keystroke directly from their secure cloud servers. I pressed the spacebar. The first slide flashed onto the massive screen behind me. The text bubbles were enlarged, rendering the timestamps and sender identifications impossible to miss. Bradley scrambled to pull his reading glasses from his breast pocket, his arrogant demeanor completely evaporating. I read the projected text aloud, ensuring every word was permanently etched onto the official deposition record. On October 10th, at 4 in the afternoon, Terrence sent the following message. We have a massive liquidity problem. The SEC is sniffing around the escrow accounts. The early investors are demanding their quarterly dividend payouts by Friday, or they are going to call the federal authorities. We are short by almost $2 million. If I do not find liquid cash immediately, the entire fund collapses, and I am looking at serious prison time. I paused, letting the severity of Terrence's panic echo in the silent room. Then I read the next message. Brittany replied less than 2 minutes later. Her exact words were, "Just tell my idiot parents that you have an exclusive limited-time real estate venture. Tell them you can guarantee a 20% return if they act right now." They are so obsessed with having a wealthy son-in-law that they will literally mortgage the family estate to keep up appearances at their stupid country club. Take their retirement money and pay off the loudmouth investors. Just make sure you siphon off enough extra cash into my private Cayman account so I can still go on that luxury shopping trip to Dubai next week. The silence in the deposition room was absolute and terrifying. The sound of Sylvia letting out a sharp, devastated gasp cut through the heavy air like shattered glass. Howard gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He stared at the giant projected screen, his mouth hanging open, as he read his favorite daughter, cruel, calculating words over and over again. Brittany's face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Bradley slammed his hand onto the marble table, his face flushed with panicked desperation. "Objection!" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "These messages lack proper context. This is inadmissible hearsay. You cannot definitively prove my client actually typed those specific words. Someone else could have easily had access to her phone." "That is a fascinating legal theory, Bradley," I countered smoothly, tapping the keyboard to advance to the next slide. "Let us look at the visual context." I projected a new image onto the screen. It was a selfie Brittany had sent to Terrence within that exact same encrypted message thread. She was sitting in the first-class lounge of the international terminal, holding a glass of expensive champagne and grinning brightly at the camera. The caption beneath her photo read, "Thanks for the Dubai money, babe. Good luck dealing with my gullible parents. Do not forget to transfer the rest of the cash before they realize their retirement fund is completely empty." I turned away from the screen and locked my gaze directly onto my sister. "You did not just suspect your husband was struggling financially, Brittany. You actively, willfully orchestrated the complete financial destruction of our own parents. You handed Terrence the exact psychological playbook he needed to manipulate Howard and Sylvia into signing away their entire life savings. You called them gullible. You called them idiots. You gladly sacrificed their home, their security, and their future just so you could buy designer handbags and charter private yachts on another continent. You orchestrated a multi-million-dollar fraud, and then you had the sheer breathtaking audacity to sit in a disciplinary hearing and swear under oath that I was the criminal." Bradley slowly sank back into his leather chair. The fight had completely left his tense body. He stared at the screen, realizing he had staked his entire professional reputation on defending a woman who was indisputably guilty of federal conspiracy. He looked at Brittany with absolute disgust, recognizing that she had lied to him from the very beginning. The videographer camera captured every micro-expression of her guilt. The court reporter typed furiously, sealing her fate into the permanent legal record. Brittany opened her mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic, fabricated excuse, but no words came out. She was entirely trapped, pinned down by the blinding light of the projector and the crushing weight of her own insurmountable greed. I clicked the remote control, turning the screen black, and folded my hands on the marble table. I clicked the remote control, turning the screen black, and folded my hands on the marble table. The sudden absence of the glaring white light seemed to plunge the conference room into an even deeper, more suffocating darkness. The only illumination came from the ambient daylight filtering through the gaps in the blackout blinds. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. No one spoke. The court reporter hands rested motionless on her stenograph machine. The soft whir of the projector cooling down was the only sound permitted to exist in the vacuum of absolute devastation. Then a horrifying, ragged sound broke the silence. It came from Sylvia. She was gasping for air, her hands clutching the high collar of her blouse as if she were actively suffocating. She stumbled forward from her chair by the window, her knees visibly trembling beneath her designer skirt. She practically dragged herself toward the heavy marble table, her eyes locked entirely on Brittany. "Brittany," Sylvia whispered, her voice cracking with a desperate, childlike plea for reassurance. "Tell me that was a lie. Tell me Camilla fabricated those messages. Tell me you did not call us idiots and steal our retirement money to go shopping." Brittany remained frozen in her leather chair. She kept her head bowed, staring blankly at the polished marble surface. She did not shake her head. She did not utter a single word of denial. She simply sat there paralyzed by the undeniable federally subpoenaed truth of her own overwhelming greed. "Look at me!" Sylvia shrieked, the volume of her voice shattering the quiet, professional atmosphere of the room. "Look at your mother." Brittany slowly raised her head, but she could not meet Sylvia's eyes. She looked frantically toward Bradley, silently begging her attorney to save her. But Bradley was busy aggressively shoving his documents back into his briefcase, mentally calculating how quickly he could formally withdraw as her legal counsel. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with a client who had knowingly financed a criminal conspiracy with her parents' life savings. Howard stepped forward, his heavy footsteps thudding ominously against the hardwood floor. He moved past Sylvia and stood directly behind Brittany's chair. His large hands gripped the leather backrest so fiercely that the seams groaned under the pressure. His face, usually a mask of arrogant country club superiority, was twisted into a horrific portrait of profound betrayal. "You called me gullible," Howard stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the entire room. "I worked for 40 years to build that estate. I worked my entire life to secure our financial future. And you sat in a first-class airport lounge sipping champagne and laughed at me. You laughed at me for trusting you." "Dad, I can explain," Brittany sobbed, finally finding her voice. The words tumbled out of her mouth in a pathetic, desperate rush. "Terrence told me we were in temporary trouble. He said he just needed a short-term bridge loan. I did not know he was actually going to lose the money. I thought he would pay you back with interest." I did not even blink as I dismantled her pathetic defense. "The text messages clearly show you instructing him to siphon off extra cash into a hidden Cayman account. Before they realized the fund was empty," I reminded her coldly. "You did not think it was a loan. You knew it was a theft. You specifically directed him to steal from your parents so you could maintain your luxury lifestyle." Howard ignored my interjection. He was entirely focused on the daughter he had worshipped his entire life. The golden child who could do no wrong. The perfect daughter who had just willingly pushed him off a financial cliff. "You spent my retirement on a handbag," Howard roared, slamming his fist down on the marble table with such explosive force that the court reporter visibly jumped in her seat. "I mortgaged the house. I signed away the very roof over our heads because you cried to me about Terrence needing support, and you took that money and bought a custom diamond watch. You spent $250,000 in 10 days while your mother and I were sitting at home completely unaware that we were already bankrupt." Brittany shrank back into her chair, bringing her hands up to cover her face. "I am sorry," she wailed, her voice muffled by her fingers. "I am so sorry. I was scared. I wanted to protect my lifestyle. I wanted to protect my children." "You protected nothing," Sylvia cried out, her voice raw with absolute agony. "You destroyed us. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank is going to take the house. We have no savings. We have no future. You traded your parents' lives for a vacation to Dubai." The profound tragedy of their realization unfolded before my eyes with devastating clarity. For 33 years, Howard and Sylvia had poured every ounce of their love, their resources, and their fierce loyalty into Brittany. They had protected her from every consequence. They had actively sabotaged my education and my future to ensure she remained the undisputed center of their universe. They had literally signed a perjured affidavit this morning, risking federal prison time to defend her honor. And in return, their perfect daughter had treated them like disposable, gullible assets to be liquidated for a luxury shopping spree. Sylvia's legs finally gave out. She collapsed onto the hardwood floor, weeping with a visceral, gut-wrenching sorrow that filled the entire conference room. She was mourning the death of the illusion she had fiercely protected her entire life. The daughter she thought she knew did not exist. The only thing sitting in that chair was a selfish, calculating criminal who viewed her parents as nothing more than an open bank account. Howard did not move to comfort his wife. He stood frozen behind Brittany's chair, staring blankly at the dark projection screen. His broad shoulders sagged, and the aggressive, intimidating posture he had carried his entire life completely vanished. He looked like a hollow, defeated old man. He had sacrificed his integrity, his daughter Camilla, and his entire financial legacy for a woman who despised his stupidity. I sat perfectly still, observing the total collapse of my abusers. There was no joy in my chest, only the cold, hard satisfaction of ultimate justice. I had not destroyed this family. I had simply turned on the lights and forced them to look at the monsters they had nurtured. Brittany continued to sob into her hands, but the tears were entirely for herself. She was not crying because she had ruined her parents. She was crying because she was caught, because her offshore accounts were frozen, and because she knew she was going to spend the best years of her life in a federal penitentiary. The crushing silence returned, broken only by Sylvia weeping on the floor. Slowly, Howard lifted his head. His eyes moved away from Brittany and found mine across the long marble table. The anger in his gaze was entirely gone, replaced by a sudden, desperate realization. He realized that the daughter he had just mocked and disowned was currently the only person in the room with any actual power. The transition from fury to absolute desperation was immediate. He took a hesitant step away from Brittany, moving closer to my side of the table, his hands trembling as he reached out toward me. Howard took another hesitant step toward my side of the polished marble table. The transformation was grotesque. The towering, intimidating patriarch of my childhood was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, desperate man, willing to discard his pride for financial salvation. He reached out with both hands, palms facing upward in a gesture of absolute surrender. Camilla Howard started, his voice cracking with a pathetic, wheezing desperation. "You have to help us. You are the lead counsel on this class action lawsuit. You control the asset freeze. You know exactly where the federal investigators are looking. You can get our money back." Sylvia, who was still weeping on the hardwood floor, suddenly scrambled to her feet. She practically crawled around the edge of the large table, her designer skirt twisting awkwardly around her knees. She shoved past Bradley, who was currently zipping his briefcase shut, and threw herself down right next to Howard. She did not just stand there. She physically collapsed onto her knees, her hands grasping the armrest of my leather chair. "Please, Camilla," Sylvia wailed, her tear-streaked face looking up at me with wild, frantic eyes. "You are our daughter. You are our own flesh and blood. You have to prioritize our reimbursement in the settlement. We are victims just like your clients. We are the biggest victims here. You can put us at the very front of the line for the restitution payouts. $2 million is nothing to a massive federal seizure fund, but it is our entire life." I sat perfectly still, looking down at my mother, kneeling on the floor of my conference room. I looked at my father, who was leaning heavily against the table, nodding along with her frantic pleading. They were begging me. The two people who had spent my entire existence making me feel like a worthless burden were now groveling at my feet, demanding I use the very legal career they had mocked to save them from the streets. They did not stop there. The desperation quickly morphed into vicious cannibalistic rage, directed entirely at the daughter they had just been fiercely protecting. "She is dead to us," Howard roared, turning his head to glare violently at Brittany, who shrank further into her seat. "Do you hear me? You are no daughter of mine. You are a thief. You are a parasitic criminal who stole from her own family. I will never speak to you again. I will testify against you in federal court. I will tell the prosecutors everything." Sylvia vigorously nodded, her grip tightening on my chair. "We will disown her today, Camilla. We will cut her completely out of our lives. She is a monster. But you have always been so smart. You have always been the strong one. We were just blinded by her lies. We see the truth now. We see how brilliant you are. You can fix this. You can get our $2 million back before the government takes it all." The sheer velocity of their betrayal was breathtaking. In less than 10 minutes, they had completely discarded their precious golden child and were actively trying to sell her out to appease me. They possessed absolutely no loyalty to anyone but themselves and their bank accounts. They were perfectly willing to throw Brittany to the federal wolves if it meant saving their country club memberships and their mortgaged estate. I watched Brittany process this betrayal. Her sobbing hitched and she stared at her parents in absolute wide-eyed horror. "Mom!" Dad, Brittany gasped, her voice thick with panic. "You cannot mean that. I am your daughter. You cannot just abandon me. Terrence is going to prison. I need you." "Shut your mouth!" Howard bellowed at her, his face twisting with venom. "You put us in this position. You laughed at us. You are going to prison right alongside him, and I hope they throw away the key." He turned back to me, his expression softening instantly into a sickeningly sweet pleading mask. "Camilla, look at what we are dealing with. She manipulated us. We were victims of elder abuse. You can write it into the settlement agreement. You can draft a priority reimbursement clause. We will sign whatever you need us to sign. We will publicly apologize to you. We will tell everyone how successful you are. Just promise me you will wire our $2 million back to our accounts before the bank forecloses on the house." Sylvia began to stroke the sleeve of my suit jacket, her tears soaking into the expensive fabric. "We love you, Camilla. We have always loved you deep down. Please do not let us lose our home. Do not let us become a public laughingstock. You have the power to save our lives." I did not pull my arm away. I did not raise my voice. I simply let them beg. I let them debase themselves, offering me worthless apologies and conditional love they had withheld for 33 years. They thought flattery and the sudden sacrifice of Brittany would instantly erase a lifetime of psychological torment. They thought I was still that desperate teenager, yearning for their validation. "You want me to prioritize your reimbursement?" I asked, keeping my tone carefully measured and completely unreadable. "Yes," Howard pleaded eagerly, his eyes lighting up with a sudden desperate hope. "Yes, exactly. As lead counsel, you negotiate the payout structure. You can classify us as primary secured creditors. You know the legal loopholes. You can make sure we are made whole before the rest of the victims see a dime." I picked up my silver pen and tapped it rhythmically against the polished black marble. I looked at Howard's desperate, sweating face. I looked at Sylvia kneeling pathetically on the floor, ruining her expensive pantyhose. I looked at Brittany, who had just realized that the unconditional love she had flaunted my entire life was actually highly conditional, entirely dependent on her ability to maintain a wealthy facade. "You are asking me to use my position as a senior partner to manipulate a federal class action settlement," I stated, ensuring the court reporter and the videographer captured every single syllable of their ridiculous request. "You want me to prioritize the individuals who willingly handed $2 million to a documented scam artist, completely bypassing the hundreds of working-class victims who lost their modest pensions." "We are your family!" Sylvia cried out, as if that magical word excused decades of horrific abuse and current demands for legal corruption. "Blood is thicker than water, Camilla. You have to take care of your own blood first." I placed my silver pen down on the yellow legal pad. The rhythmic tapping ceased, signaling the end of their pathetic audition for my sympathy. "Let me explain exactly how the federal restitution process works." I began, my voice turning to absolute ice. "Because you are both operating under a massive, catastrophic legal delusion." I reached out and picked up the final, thinnest folder resting inside the heavy banker box. It was not a folder filled with evidence of Brittany crimes. It was a folder filled with the cold, undeniable realities of the United States federal justice system. I placed the folder on the edge of the table, directly in front of Howard, trembling hands. "This folder contains the specific guidelines enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding victim restitution in cases of massive corporate fraud." I looked directly into Sylvia's tear-filled eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clinical detachment. "You claim you are victims. You expect me to magically restore your stolen wealth and save your precious estate from foreclosure, but you are forgetting the most crucial, devastating action you took this very morning before you ever stepped foot inside this building." Howard frowned, a deep crease forming between his brows as his panicked brain tried to catch up with my legal maneuvering. "What action?" We did nothing but invest our money. I leaned forward, clasping my hands tightly together on the marble surface. I was about to drop the final crushing anvil on their entire existence, and I wanted to savor every single second of their impending realization. You did nothing but invest your money, I echoed, keeping my voice perfectly level. That might have been true yesterday, Howard. But we are not talking about yesterday. We are talking about this morning. We are talking about the disciplinary hearing where you and Sylvia stood before a state-appointed judge and willingly submitted a sworn affidavit. You stood in a formal legal proceeding and lied through your teeth to protect your golden son-in-law. Sylvia shook her head frantically, her hands gripping the edge of the heavy marble table. We were just trying to stop you from ruining the family. We thought you were having a jealous meltdown. We did not know he was a criminal. We just wanted to protect our retirement fund. We were trying to save our house. Your motivations are entirely irrelevant to the federal government, Sylvia. I explained, leaning back in my leather chair and looking at them with the cold, detached gaze of a prosecutor. The law does not care about your misplaced family loyalty or your desperate desire to maintain your country club membership. The law only cares about your actions, and your actions this morning crossed a massive, irreversible legal line. I opened the thin folder I had placed on the table and pulled out a clean, crisp copy of the exact affidavit they had submitted to the state bar. I turned it around so they could see their own signatures inked at the bottom of the page. You signed this document under penalty of perjury. I continued tapping the signatures with my silver pen. You officially swore that I was a fraudulent paralegal who had stolen a senior partner identity. You swore that the injunction I filed against Horizon Apex Capital was a manufactured illegal document. You did not just complain about my behavior, you actively attempted to strip me of my legal license and have me thrown in prison. And you did it specifically to force me to drop the asset freeze on Terrence. Howard's face turned a sickly shade of gray. His eyes darted from the paper to my face, the reality of his arrogant mistake slowly sinking into his panicked brain. We can retract it, he stammered, his voice lacking any of its usual booming authority. We can call the committee right now. We will tell them we were confused. We will tell them Brittany manipulated us into signing it. We will drop the complaint entirely. You cannot simply unring a federal bell, Howard, I stated, slicing through his pathetic attempt at damage control. The complaint is already on the official record, but the perjury itself is actually the least of your problems right now. The true catastrophe lies in the timing and the target of your fabricated allegations. I stood up from my chair and slowly paced behind it, commanding the attention of the entire room. The videographer adjusted his camera to follow my movements, capturing the absolute dismantling of my parents' financial future. When you filed that false complaint, I was already the officially designated lead counsel representing the defrauded victims of Horizon Apex Capital, I explained, projecting my voice clearly for the transcript. I was actively coordinating with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My injunction was a crucial court-approved mechanism designed to stop Terrence from destroying evidence and fleeing the country with the remaining stolen assets. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle heavily over the quiet conference room. By filing a perjured affidavit to have me removed from the case, you actively attempted to sabotage an ongoing federal investigation. I delivered the fatal blow with surgical precision. You did not just lie, you deliberately interfered with the pursuit of a criminal enterprise. In the eyes of the United States Department of Justice, you are no longer classified as innocent, unsuspecting victims. You are legally categorized as accessories to the obstruction of justice. Sylvia let out another ragged gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Her tear-stained face contorted in pure, unadulterated horror. She looked frantically at Bradley Pierce, hoping the slick defense attorney would jump in and object to my legal assessment. But Bradley kept his eyes firmly glued to his notepad. He knew I was absolutely right, and he had no intention of sinking his own ship to save a pair of admitted felons. "We are victims," Sylvia wailed, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "We lost $2 million. We are going to lose our home. You cannot treat us like criminals." I stopped pacing and rested my hands on the back of my leather chair. I am not treating you like criminals, Sylvia. The law is. There is a fundamental legal principle known as the clean hands doctrine. It dictates that you cannot seek equitable relief or demand financial restitution from a court if you yourself have acted unethically or illegally in relation to the matter at hand. Howard sank heavily against the edge of the marble table, his broad shoulders collapsing under the crushing weight of his own catastrophic stupidity. The Victim Restitution Fund is managed by federal prosecutors. I continued, relentlessly ensuring they understood the absolute finality of their ruin. That fund is designed to reimburse the honest, hardworking people who were completely blindsided by Terrence fraud. The government prioritizes the innocent. They do not write multi-million-dollar reimbursement checks to individuals who actively conspired to derail the lead investigator. They do not reward people who committed felony perjury to protect the primary architect of the Ponzi scheme. "You are going to take our money," Howard whispered, his eyes wide and vacant. He was staring at the marble table as if he were watching his entire estate burn to the ground. "I am not taking anything from you, Howard," I corrected him coldly. "The federal government is going to seize whatever is left of your illicit investments, and they are going to distribute it to the teachers, the nurses, and the blue-collar workers that your son-in-law defrauded. Your claim to the Victim Compensation Fund is completely compromised by your own malicious actions this morning. You tried to bury me to save your lifestyle, and in doing so you willingly surrendered your only legal avenue for reimbursement." The silence that followed was absolute. There were no more threats. There was no more arrogant blustering. There were no more demands for priority treatment or conditional love. Howard and Sylvia simply stared at the floor, entirely paralyzed by the consequences of their relentless, lifelong cruelty. They had traded their entire financial existence for the fleeting satisfaction of trying to destroy me, and the law had just handed them the bill. I reached back into the banker box beside my chair and pulled out an envelope bearing the seal of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. I stood up and handed it directly into my father's trembling hands. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot, before looking down at the stark lettering across the page. It was a formal notice of federal asset forfeiture. Howard swallowed hard as his eyes scanned the dense legal text. Sylvia leaned against his arm, reading the bold paragraphs over his shoulder. Her breathing became erratic with every sentence she comprehended. "That document was delivered to my office by a federal courier right before this deposition began," I stated. "It outlines the financial penalties and asset seizures approved by the federal judge overseeing Terrence's criminal indictment. The government traced the exact flow of the $2 million you wired to Horizon Apex Capital. Because Terrence commingled your retirement funds with the stolen capital of the defrauded victims, your money is officially classified as the proceeds of a criminal enterprise." Sylvia looked up from the terrifying document, her face completely drained of color. "But it was our money," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her impending reality. "We earned that money. We saved it for 40 years. It was clean when we gave it to him." "It stopped being clean the second it entered a fraudulent account, Sylvia," I explained. "Under normal circumstances, you could have filed an innocent investor claim to recover a fraction of your capital. But as I outlined, you permanently forfeited your innocence this morning at the disciplinary hearing. The Department of Justice does not extend financial grace to individuals who actively submit perjured affidavits to protect a Ponzi scheme. By committing a felony to sabotage my legal career, you legally abandoned your right to seek equitable relief." Howard's hands shook violently, causing the paper to rattle. He pointed a trembling finger at the second page. "It says they are placing a lien on the estate." He choked out, his voice a hollow whisper. "It says the primary residence is subject to immediate federal seizure. Camilla, they cannot take the house. It has been in the family for 3 decades. You grew up in that house. You leveraged that exact house to fund a criminal," I reminded him coldly. "You took out a massive second mortgage to hand Terrence liquidity. The bank that issued that mortgage is now a secured creditor in a federal fraud investigation. Since you have zero capital left to make the monthly mortgage payments and the equity is tied to a seized corporate account, The federal government is stepping in to liquidate the property. They are going to sell your estate at a public auction to compensate the victims your son-in-law destroyed. Brittany, sitting in paralyzed silence, let out a sharp gasp. But where are they going to live? She demanded, looking from my parents to me. If the government takes the estate, where are Mom and Dad supposed to go? They do not have anything left. I looked at my sister with unfiltered disdain. That sounds like a logistical problem for you to solve, Brittany. Perhaps they can move into the luxury penthouse you are also about to lose. Or maybe you can share a cramped apartment just like the one you mocked me for living in while I was putting myself through law school. Howard dropped the notice onto the marble table as if the paper had burned his fingers. He looked at me, the arrogant patriarch replaced by a broken beggar. Camilla, you are a senior partner, he pleaded in desperation. You know the federal prosecutors. You understand this complex corporate law better than anyone in this city. You can represent us. You can file an appeal. You can tell the judge we were manipulated by Terrence. We will pay you whatever you want. We will sign a contract right now. I laughed out loud, a harsh sound that filled the tense room. You want to hire me? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief at his audacity. You walked into a state building this morning and swore under oath that I was a fraudulent paralegal who stole a senior partner identity. You tried to have me thrown in state prison and permanently disbarred, and now you want me to serve as your defense attorney against the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Howard's face crumpled. We were wrong, he sobbed, tears breaking through his facade. We were so incredibly wrong about you. You are brilliant. You are powerful. Please, Camilla. We are your parents. You cannot let us die in poverty. I placed my hands flat on the polished table, leaning forward to deliver the final blow. I am the lead prosecutor for the defrauded victims, Howard. Representing the people who funded the fraud would be a massive career-ending conflict of interest. Even if I wanted to help you, which I absolutely do not, the law expressly forbids it. You dug this grave with your blinding arrogance, and now you get to be buried in it. I turned my attention to the court reporter who was rapidly typing every devastating word. This concludes the deposition of Brittany Miller, I announced firmly. Bradley Pierce, who had been sitting in terrified silence for the past hour, abruptly snapped his briefcase shut. He stood up, refusing to look at Brittany or my weeping parents. Let the record show that I am formally withdrawing as legal counsel for the defendant, Bradley stated loudly, sprinting toward the glass doors. I will be filing the withdrawal motion with the federal clerk within the hour. Bradley pushed through the heavy doors, fleeing the sinking ship to save his career. Brittany wailed, burying her face in her arms. Sylvia collapsed against Howard, both of them weeping over the federal document that spelled their doom. I packed my briefcase, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular collapse of their entire empire. I snapped the polished brass locks of my briefcase, shut the sharp click echoing in the cavernous deposition room. Leaving them there to drown in their own tears was the most satisfying exit of my professional career. I did not look back as I walked through the heavy glass doors, leaving behind the shattered remnants of the family that had tried to destroy me. The deposition was over, but the machinery of federal justice was only just beginning to turn. 14 months passed since that day in the conference room. The federal government moves methodically, meticulously, building cases that are utterly impossible to defend against. For Terrence, those 14 months were a slow, agonizing march toward an inevitable conclusion. His legal team tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution refused to entertain any leniency. The evidence I had provided during the civil discovery phase handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation a flawless, airtight criminal indictment. On a frigid Tuesday morning in November, I sat in the polished wooden gallery of the federal courthouse. The courtroom was packed with the defrauded victims of Horizon Apex Capital. Teachers who had lost their pensions, retired firefighters stripped of their savings, and small business owners who had trusted the wrong man filled the wooden benches. They were all waiting to see the architect of their financial ruin face the music. Terrence was led into the courtroom through a side door by two armed federal marshals. The transformation was jarring. The arrogant, custom-suited investment banker was completely gone. In his place was a defeated hollow man wearing a standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit. His wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that clattered loudly against the floor with every shuffle he took toward the defense table. He looked as though he had aged 20 years. His hair was thinning, his posture was slumped, and his eyes remained fixed firmly on the ground. The federal judge presiding over the sentencing hearing was a no-nonsense magistrate known for handing down maximum penalties for white-collar crimes. He spent 45 minutes reading the victim impact statements onto the official record. When he finally addressed Terrence directly, his voice was filled with palpable disgust. Terrence Miller, the judge, announced, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. "You orchestrated a massive predatory fraud designed to enrich yourself at the expense of hardworking citizens. You viewed your investors not as people, but as endless fuel for your own insatiable greed. The court finds no mitigating factors in your conduct. It is the judgment of this court that you be committed to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 180 months, 15 years. A gasp rippled through the gallery, followed immediately by quiet, relieved tears from the victims. Terrence's shoulders collapsed completely. 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The federal marshals immediately grabbed his arms and hauled him away to begin serving his sentence. He was gone, erased from the opulent world he had ruthlessly stolen to inhabit. I turned my head and looked toward the very back row of the courtroom gallery. Sitting alone in the shadows, entirely unrecognized by the crowd of victims, was Brittany. She looked completely unrecognizable. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by a cheap, faded gray coat. Her hair was unkempt and her face was drawn and gaunt. She watched her husband being dragged away in chains, but there were no theatrical tears this time. She was completely numb, hollowed out by the relentless, crushing reality of her own impending doom. While Terrence was fighting a losing battle in criminal court, Brittany had been fighting a desperate, humiliating war in bankruptcy court. Because she had actively participated in spending the stolen funds and attempted to hide assets in the Cayman Islands, the federal government showed her absolutely no mercy. The judge forced her into a Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceeding. There was no restructuring of debt. There was no payment plan. There was only total, absolute liquidation. A court-appointed bankruptcy trustee seized total control of her entire financial existence. Every single asset tied to her name was auctioned off to reimburse the Victim Restitution Fund. The federal agents raided her luxury penthouse and confiscated the $20,000 bags she had purchased in Dubai. They seized the custom diamond watches, the designer shoe collection, and the imported sports cars sitting in the parking garage. They stripped her down to the legal minimum required for basic human survival. The final fatal blow came exactly 3 weeks after Terrence was locked away. I received the official notification through the court filing system because my firm still represented the class action plaintiffs. The bank had successfully finalized the foreclosure on her luxury downtown penthouse. The property had been seized, and the eviction notice was legally executed. I read the detailed report submitted by the bankruptcy trustee. On a rainy Thursday morning, federal marshals arrived at the penthouse to enforce the vacate order. Brittany was given exactly 1 hour to collect her remaining personal belongings. She was not allowed to take any furniture, any electronics, or any valuables that had been cataloged by the court. She walked out of the glass lobby of the most exclusive building in Chicago, carrying a single battered cardboard box and 2 black trash bags filled with basic clothing. There were no paparazzi waiting to hear her side of the story. There was no slick defense attorney standing by her side to threaten civil rights lawsuits. She stood on the wet city sidewalk completely alone, waiting for a city bus because she could not even afford a taxi. She had willingly sacrificed her own parents' retirement fund and participated in a multi-million-dollar fraud just to maintain a facade of infinite wealth. Now, she was officially homeless, entirely penniless, and universally despised. The spectacular downfall of Brittany Miller was absolute. She had built her entire identity on viewing everyone else as beneath her. She had spent her whole life treating me like an ugly, inadequate failure, while she basked in the unearned glory of our parents' toxic favoritism. Now the roles were permanently and irreversibly reversed. I was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, securing millions for defrauded victims, while my sister was dragging garbage bags onto public transportation. The scales of justice had finally balanced, and they had crushed her completely in the process. But the crushing weight of federal retribution did not stop at Brittany. The devastating shockwave of the Horizon Apex Capital scandal radiated outward violently, striking the two people who had enabled her profound arrogance for 3 decades. Howard and Sylvia had spent their entire lives meticulously cultivating an image of impenetrable aristocratic wealth. They had sacrificed their own daughter on the altar of country club elitism and superficial superiority. Now that very same altar was being systematically dismantled and sold to the highest bidder by the United States Department of Justice. The federal forfeiture of their heavily mortgaged estate was swift, highly publicized, and entirely merciless. There was no graceful exit. There was no quiet, dignified downsizing to a smaller luxury condominium. The bank, operating under the strict directives of the Federal Bankruptcy Court, executed the foreclosure with clinical precision. The sprawling, manicured property, where they had hosted lavish galas and openly mocked my career ambitions, was placed on the public auction block. Federal agents marched through the grand hallways, cataloging their antique furniture, their imported art collection, and Sylvia prized diamond jewelry. Every single item of tangible value was seized, tagged, and liquidated to feed the victim restitution fund. Their beloved country club, an exclusive institution that prized pristine reputation above all else, acted with ruthless efficiency. The wealthy board of directors held a swift emergency meeting and formally revoked their lifetime membership without a single dissenting vote. Howard and Sylvia were officially declared persona non grata. The affluent friends they had spent decades trying to impress stopped returning their phone calls overnight. The society ladies who used to drink expensive mimosas with Sylvia suddenly pretended not to know her when they crossed paths in the city. In the insular circles of high society, absolutely nothing is more radioactive than federal fraud and absolute bankruptcy. They became complete social pariahs, entirely isolated and shunned in a city they once arrogantly believed they ruled. With their physical assets seized, their bank accounts entirely drained, and their credit scores completely decimated by the federal liens, they had absolutely nowhere left to turn. They were forced to rent a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment in a decaying, poorly maintained building on the far industrial outskirts of the city. It was a harsh, unforgiving environment that smelled constantly of cheap bleach and old cooking oil, a stark and brutal contrast to the imported marble and vaulted ceilings they had lost. At 65 years old, an age when their wealthy peers were retiring to sunny coastal villas and traveling the globe on luxury cruise ships, Howard and Sylvia were abruptly thrust into the brutal reality of the minimum wage workforce. They had no emergency savings, no retirement portfolios, and absolutely no financial safety net. Their basic survival depended entirely on scraping together hourly wages. Howard, a man who used to bark aggressive orders at corporate executives from the head of a mahogany boardroom table, was hired as a shift worker at a massive UN air-conditioned home improvement warehouse. His long, exhausting days were spent wearing a bright orange uniform vest, pushing heavy wooden flatbed carts across concrete floors, and stocking dusty shelves with heavy plumbing supplies. His knees ached relentlessly. His lower back throbbed with constant pain, and he was forced to endure the daily soul-crushing humiliation of being reprimanded by floor managers who were 40 years his junior. He had to bite his tongue and nod obediently to keep his meager paycheck entirely stripped of the booming, intimidating authority he had wielded like a weapon his entire life. Sylvia suffered an equally devastating and highly public fall from grace. The woman who had once ridiculed me for looking like a cheap shop girl was now wearing a stiff polyester uniform and standing on her feet for 8 agonizing hours a day as a retail greeter at a massive discount box store. Her perfectly manicured hands became rough and calloused from scanning barcodes, wiping down dirty conveyor belts, and handling loose change. She had to smile politely at demanding customers who treated her with the exact same dismissive, arrogant contempt she had once directed at me. She spent her shifts handing out shopping carts to people she used to actively look down upon, her pride completely ground into dust by the harsh reality of retail labor. The physical exhaustion of their new impoverished lives was secondary only to the profound, inescapable psychological torment of their own making. They lived paycheck to paycheck, terrified of an unexpected medical bill or a sudden rent increase. The meager meals they ate in their cramped kitchen were a constant bitter reminder of the expensive multi-course dinners they used to enjoy at the country club. Howard would sit at their small, wobbly dining table, massaging his swollen joints, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. Sylvia would rub her aching feet, her eyes filled with unshed tears of profound regret as she remembered the expansive estate she had willingly signed away. Every single time Howard clocked in for his grueling warehouse shift, he was forced to remember that he had literally handed $2 million to a smooth-talking criminal. Every time Sylvia checked the balance on her pathetic weekly paycheck, she was actively haunted by the knowledge that she had traded her luxurious, peaceful retirement for her golden child, extravagant shopping spree in Dubai. They had placed all their bets on the wrong daughter. They had actively conspired to destroy the one highly successful person who could have actually protected them from this exact fate. And because of the federal perjury trap they had willingly and arrogantly walked into during that fateful disciplinary hearing, they could not even reach out to ask me for a single dime of financial assistance. Any attempt to contact me or extort me for money would risk an immediate federal indictment for obstruction of justice. They were permanently trapped in a miserable prison of their own meticulous design, serving a bitter, agonizing life sentence of minimum wage labor and absolutely crushing regret. I, on the other hand, was standing on the expansive private balcony of my corner office on the 40th floor of Vanguard Croft and Associates. The crisp Chicago night air whipped around me, carrying the distant, energetic hum of the vibrant city below. The skyline was a breathtaking ocean of glittering lights, a sprawling metropolis that I had conquered entirely on my own terms. I held a crystal glass of expensive champagne, feeling the cool condensation against my fingertips. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the crisp taste of absolute, unshakable victory. Behind me, the heavy glass doors of my office were propped wide open, allowing the warm, ambient light and the sounds of genuine celebration to spill out onto the terrace. Inside, my true family was gathered around the polished mahogany conference table. It was not a family bound by toxic bloodlines or conditional love. It was a family forged in the trenches of hard work, mutual respect, and unwavering loyalty. Harrison Croft, the senior managing partner who had backed my legal strategy without a single moment of hesitation, was currently pouring another round of vintage champagne. The three brilliant, exhausted, and incredibly dedicated junior associates who had locked themselves in a war room with me for 72 hours to extract Brittany-deleted text messages were laughing brightly, toasting to their well-deserved bonuses and upcoming promotions. This was my found family. These were the people who saw my intellect, recognized my relentless drive, and valued my presence without demanding I shrink myself to make them comfortable. They did not care about country club pedigrees or superficial social standing. They cared about integrity, brilliance, and the relentless pursuit of justice. They had stood shoulder to shoulder with me when the digital mob was calling for my disbarment, and they had helped me build the ironclad legal guillotine that permanently severed my ties to my abusers. I leaned against the sleek glass railing of the balcony, looking down at the tiny moving headlights of the cars navigating the financial district. For 33 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of my parents' crushing expectations and relentless cruelty. I had spent my childhood wondering why I was never quite good enough, why my straight-A report cards were ignored, while Brittany mediocre achievements were celebrated with lavish parties. I had internalized their gaslighting, carrying a quiet, persistent fear that perhaps I really was the difficult, inadequate burden they constantly claimed I was. I thought about the agonizing nights I spent studying in a freezing apartment, eating cheap noodles, and wondering if I was making a colossal mistake. I thought about the sheer terror of handing over that massive student loan paperwork, knowing I had absolutely no financial safety net to catch me if I failed. I had been my own safety net. I had been my own champion. But standing here tonight, suspended above the city that I had made my own, I finally understood the absolute truth. Their cruelty was never about my lack of worth. It was entirely about their profound, terrifying lack of character. They were hollow, superficial people who required a scapegoat to project their own massive insecurities onto. They needed me to be a failure so they could justify their toxic worship of a golden child who ultimately led them straight to financial slaughter. I did not destroy my family. I simply handed them the rope and they enthusiastically tied their own nooses. I established a firm, impenetrable boundary, and their blinding arrogance drove them to repeatedly slam their heads against it until they completely shattered their own lives. Setting boundaries with toxic blood relatives is never an act of malice. It is a fundamental act of self-preservation. It is the radical necessary decision to stop setting yourself on fire just to keep your abusers warm. If you take away anything from my story, let it be this unyielding truth. Blood does not automatically grant someone a VIP pass to disrespect you, extort you, or use your life as a stepping stone for their own ego. You are not obligated to finance the delusions of people who mock your ambitions. You are not required to save the very individuals who gladly threw you to the wolves. The absolute best revenge you can ever exact upon toxic family members is not screaming matches or physical altercations. The ultimate revenge is massive, undeniable success, coupled with total, chilling indifference to their eventual self-destruction. You must build your empire quietly, meticulously, and flawlessly. You must surround yourself with people who applaud your strength rather than those who are intimidated by it. And when the people who doubted you finally come crawling back begging for a piece of the sanctuary you built with your own bare hands, you look them directly in the eye and close the heavy steel door. You let them reap the catastrophic harvest of the seeds they willingly planted. I finished the last sip of my champagne, turning my back on the sprawling city skyline to rejoin the warm, authentic celebration happening inside my office. The chapter of my life defined by Howard, Sylvia, and Brittany was officially and permanently closed. I had excised the cancerous tumors from my existence, and I was stepping into a bright, limitless new era, defined entirely by my own power, my own wealth, and my own unbreakable rules. Have you ever had to use the cold, hard reality of the law to protect yourself from the very people who were supposed to love you? Have you ever watched a golden child completely destroy a toxic family from the inside out while you sat back and watched the karma unfold? I want to hear your stories of survival and absolute vindication in the comments section below. Share your experiences of establishing unbreakable boundaries and building your own found family from scratch. If my journey of ultimate legal retribution resonated with you today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of people standing up, fighting back, and winning the ultimate war against toxic abusers. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember to always keep your receipts, because the truth will always be your greatest weapon. The story of Camilla serves as a powerful testament to the absolute necessity of establishing uncompromising boundaries, particularly when dealing with toxic family dynamics. For decades, Camilla was forced into the role of the designated scapegoat, subjected to relentless emotional manipulation, financial neglect, and belittlement by parents who blindly favored a superficial golden child. The profound lesson embedded in her journey is that biological ties do not grant anyone a free pass to disrespect, extort, or abuse you. Society often touts family as an unbreakable, unconditional bond. But Camilla's experience shatters the dangerous illusion that we must tolerate relentless mistreatment simply because we share DNA with our abusers. Instead of internalizing their cruelty or seeking validation through chaotic emotional confrontations, Camilla channeled her pain into building an impenetrable fortress of personal and professional success. She proved that the most devastating and effective response to lifelong gaslighting is not a screaming match, but rather an unshakable, documented truth coupled with total indifference to the perpetrator's own self-destruction. When her family ultimately fell victim to their blinding arrogance, greed, and a federal perjury trap of their own making, Camilla did not waver. She allowed them to face the full legal and financial consequences of their actions, realizing that rescuing them would only mean sacrificing her own hard-earned peace. Ultimately, her triumph was not merely about winning a high-stakes legal battle or securing her wealth. It was about reclaiming her identity and agency. She redefined what family meant by surrounding herself with a found family of colleagues who respected her brilliance and supported her unconditionally. Evaluate your own relationships today and have the courage to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served.